Chapter 389. Go to watch net. After the little foxes shouted in unison, Su Chan poked her head out like a sunny day after a storm. She said with a proud and excited face, "Really? Do you also think my idea is good?" The little foxes nodded in unison. "That's a great idea." Su Chan was overjoyed. She turned her head and was about to ask Li Yundong for credit, but when she saw his black face and countless blue veins on his forehead, her heart suddenly skipped a beat and her head drooped little by little. Like a little wife who had done something wrong, she rubbed the corners of her clothes with both hands and said timidly, I was just saying it casually." Li Yundong's face darkened. He pointed at the notebook and paper on the dining table. "Do what you need to do." "Oh." She lowered her head, looking aggrieved and nervous. Her eyes darted around, and from time to time, she peeked at Li Yundong. When she saw Li Yundong looking at her, she quickly withdrew her gaze, like a frightened deer. Watch net. 7 KOM. Seeing Su Chan's expression, Li Yundong was both angry and amused. He said to the little foxes with a straight face, "Did I say everything just now for nothing? Do I, the sect leader, still keep my word?" Although his words were directed at the little foxes, they were actually meant for Chao Yi and the others to hear. Chao Yi quickly stood up to maintain order and said loudly, "All of you, be quiet and listen to leader." After that, she turned to Li Yundong and said with an apologetic smile, "Leader, please continue." Li Yundong saw that the other people had strange expressions on their faces, as if they wanted to laugh but didn't dare to. He was depressed in his heart, but it was not appropriate for him to lose his temper. He could only laugh and continue, "Now, I will temporarily announce the first rule of the meeting in the future. Before speaking, you must raise your hand first. The host of the meeting is not allowed to speak without permission. Otherwise, why would it be so chaotic?" One Hongling snorted and muttered in a low voice, "Dictatorship." Unexpectedly, Li Yundong glared at him. "Even if you want to scold someone, you have to raise your hand for approval first." One Hongling was furious. She raised her hand high and gritted her teeth. Li Yundong acted as if he hadn't seen it. He said slowly, "Now, I'll announce the second rule of the meeting. As the host of the meeting, he has the right to choose to ignore the speaker." One Hongling was so angry that she pointed at Li Yundong with her hands on her hips and said, "You are too overbearing." Li Yundong still said seriously, "Please raise your hand before you speak." One Hongling raised her hand high again. Li Yundong immediately said, "Continue to ignore her." "You." One Hongling was so angry that she almost fainted. The little foxes of the Fox Zen school couldn't help giggling. Chao Yi, Zhuang Yiting, and Lu Yuehong also had strange expressions on their faces. The corners of their mouths twitched, as if they were trying to hold back their laughter. Su Chan, who had been pressing her head down, burst into laughter, but she quickly covered her mouth with her hands and glanced at him timidly. Seeing that he wasn't paying attention to her, she felt relieved and tried to sneak a smile. One Hongling was so angry that her lungs were about to explode. She sat down and gritted her teeth as if she couldn't wait to fry Li Yundong and chew him hard. Li Yundong casually picked up a spoon and used it as a gavel. He knocked on the table and attracted everyone's attention again. He said, "Attention, everyone. Now let's get down to business. Someone robbed us of our decoration workers, and now we can't find a decoration master in the entire Tiannan city. What do you think we should do?" Everyone looked at each other and didn't say a word. Seeing that they were all silent, Li Yundong pretended to be angry and said, "You were so enthusiastic just now. Why aren't you talking now?" At this time, Chao Yi raised her hand weakly. Li Yundong quickly said, "Chao Yi Shibua, do you have something to say?" Chao Yi said tentatively, "Leader, if we can't find a decoration master, can we not decorate, save a sum of money, and make do with it?" Li Yundong looked like he was about to collapse. He asked, then if the Taoist temple where the Fox Zen school is located is to be changed into a temple, can we let the monks live in it for a while? Chao Yi smiled dryly. I was just saying. Li Yundong shook his head helplessly and said to the others, do you have any other ideas? Everyone in the Fox Zen school was a master who couldn't do anything right. Li Yundong's words were no different from asking for advice from the blind. The foxes, big and small, looked at each other and shook their heads like a rattle drum. In fact, Li Yundong was just putting on a show. He didn't expect the troublemakers of the Fox Zen school to come up with any good ideas. He straightened his face and said, since no one has a good idea, I'll tell you my idea. Wan Hongling, who had been sulking, couldn't help but snort again. Why didn't you just say your idea earlier? Why are you beating around the bush? Li Yundong glared at her and said, raise your hand. Wan Hongling raised her hand, and Li Yundong immediately said, ignore it again. This time, Wan Hongling didn't even have the strength to be angry. She just rolled her eyes. Seeing that the nonviolent and uncooperative miss was finally no longer naughty, Li Yundong coughed again and said, my idea is to do it myself and have enough food and clothing. Do it ourselves? Everyone was shocked at the same time. Zi Yuan, who had been struggling with Wan Hongling's lover, had not been in the mood for a meeting, but at this time, she said with a surprised face, do you mean that we should decorate it ourselves? Wan Hongling opened her mouth wide and said, I always thought that there was a limit to your arrogance, but I didn't expect you to be so arrogant. You're the one who's going crazy, don't drag us into it. Su Chan also raised her head and said tongue-tied, Yundong, we don't know how to decorate it. The little foxes looked at each other. Do it ourselves? What do you mean? Are we going out to work? What kind of work? Is it fun? It doesn't matter whether it's fun or not. As long as we can go out. It's so boring to stay in the house all day long. At this time, the little foxes reached a consensus. As long as we can go out and play, it doesn't matter what we do. Their eyes lit up and they nodded in unison. Okay, okay. Leader, what are we going to do? Seeing that the room was in chaos again, Li Yundong hurriedly knocked on the glass table with a spoon and shouted, silence. Raise your hands. Remember to raise your hands. Everyone immediately shut up and looked at Li Yundong in unison. Li Yundong said with a serious face, why, is it difficult to decorate? Why do I feel that it's nothing more than carpentry, masonry, and some decoration and design work? The most difficult thing in the world is cultivation. Is decoration more difficult than cultivation? Which one of you is not a cultivator? Which one of you is not confident? Stand up and speak up. Everyone's eyes were fixed on him. No one was willing to stand up and admit it. They all shook their heads. Li Yundong said again, since you also admit this, then it's easy to talk about it. I'll arrange the work later to ensure that everyone can make the best use of their talents. These words made Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Wan Hongling, and the others curious. Su Chan secretly poked Li Yundong's arm with a pen and whispered, Yundong, give me a good job later. Unexpectedly, Li Yundong glared at her indifferently and said, raise your hands. Su Chan raised her hand with an aggrieved expression. Only then did Li Yundong nod with satisfaction. Go ahead. The little girl said eagerly, can you give me a good job later? Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, okay, I'll arrange it. When the little foxes heard this, they immediately clamored, it's not fair. We also want a good job. Li Yundong shouted, what are you arguing about? I have my own arrangements. Chao Yi and the other two Shirbas also shouted, don't quarrel. Listen to the leader's arrangements. It won't be too late to quarrel if the arrangements are not good. Huh? What are you talking about? Li Yundong looked at Chao Yi and the other two Shirbas speechlessly. Just as he was about to speak, he saw Wan Hongling raise her hand high with a bitter look on her face. It was as if she would immediately pounce on Li Yundong and perish together with him if he didn't call her. Li Yundong had no choice but to say, "Hongling, what do you want to say? You don't have to swear." Wan Hongling snorted and said loudly, "Do you think I'm like you? I just want to ask, I'm not a member of the Fox Zen school. Can I not get involved in this matter?" Li Yundong laughed and said, "Okay. But if this shop makes money in the future, you won't get a single cent." Wan Hongling said proudly, "It doesn't matter. Sister Zi Yuan has shares and can get a share of the money. I'll ask her for it." After that, she turned her face and said with a complacent smile, "Sister Zi Yuan, isn't that right?" Zi Yuan looked at Wan Hongling with a faint smile on her face and didn't say a word. The two of them looked at each other for a long time. Wan Hongling's hair stood on end, and she looked defeated. She turned to Li Yundong dejectedly and said, "Well, I'll do my work. What do you want me to do?" With a kind face, Li Yundong said earnestly, "That's right. As the saying goes, everyone is born with a talent. Hongling, you are very experienced, clever, and hardworking. I'll just appoint you as the artistic director and CEO of the Desanxian store." Wan Hongling originally had a deep grudge against Li Yundong, but when she heard Li Yundong's flattery, she was immediately delighted. She deliberately put on airs and said, "Humph, it sounds good. Who doesn't know that these official titles such as manager and president are as worthless as cabbages?" Li Yundong's face darkened. "Do you want to do it or not? If you don't, I'll let someone else do it." Wan Hongling immediately replied, "Yes." Li Yundong rolled his eyes at her and said to the little foxes, "You are all shop assistants, future store managers, and shareholders." The little foxes were inexperienced in the world, so they didn't know that Li Yundong was just fooling them. When they saw that Li Yundong was serious, they felt that they were also great people. They were all beaming with joy, as if they didn't have a nose or an eye. Li Yundong tried hard to hold back his laughter and said to Chao Yi and the others, "Shibwa, please be the lobby manager." Chao Yi and the others didn't know what the lobby manager's job was, so they had no choice but to agree to it first in confusion. Li Yundong turned to Zi Yuan and said, "Zi Yuan, you have contributed the most, and you are also a major shareholder. You can be the general manager of the local Desanxian store." Zi Yuan smiled. She didn't expose Li Yundong's tricks. She smiled and nodded without saying a word. Su Chan saw that Li Yundong was talking excitedly, but after a long time, he still couldn't talk about her, so she anxiously waved her hand in front of his eyes. Li Yundong only saw a hand waving left and right in front of him. At first, he deliberately pretended not to see it, but he didn't expect that after a while, the little girl would be so anxious that she simply jumped in front of Li Yundong and blocked his view. Li Yundong had no choice but to say, "What's wrong?" Su Chan stamped her feet and said, "You promised me that you would give me a good job." Li Yundong pretended to be suddenly enlightened, patted his forehead, and said, "Oh, look at me, I almost forgot." Su Chan giggled and said, "It's okay, it's okay. Tell me, what kind of official should I be?" Li Yundong sighed and said, "Alas, at such a young age, all of you are so addicted to being an official." "Ah." Su Chan said coquettishly, "Tell me, tell me." Li Yundong had no choice but to say, "Then I'll appoint you as the chief commander of the renovation this time." Su Chan was overjoyed at first, and her eyebrows were almost flying. But soon she thought about it and said, "That's not right. What do you mean by the chief commander of the renovation this time? What about in the future?" "No, I want to be like them, a permanent official in the local Desanxian store." Li Yundong pinched the little girl's nose and said with a smile, "You fool, didn't I tell you before? If I am the boss, you will be the boss's wife. Isn't the position of the boss of Desanxian not enough for you to show off?" Su Chan was so happy that she didn't care that there were others around. She put her arms around Li Yundong's neck and kissed him hard. Wan Hongling stole a glance at Zi Yuan. She didn't know whether it was intentional or not, but Zi Yuan avoided her gaze. Wan Hongling thought to herself, this Li Yundong is so heartless. If it weren't for my sister Zi Yuan, he wouldn't have been able to run this shop. How could he say such things in front of so many people? It's too much. Wan Hongling couldn't help but say sarcastically, Chief Commander. Boss's wife. What kind of position is that? Su Chan could hear the hidden meaning in Wan Hongling's words, but she thought that Wan Hongling was jealous that her position was higher than hers, so she proudly showed off, anyway, I'm a higher official than you. Wan Hongling snorted and said, what does it matter? Can you say it out loud? When Su Chan heard this, she was dumbfounded. How could she know this? The little girl quickly pulled Li Yundong's sleeve and said eagerly, Yundong, what do I care? Li Yundong tried hard to hold back his laughter and said, don't you know? The chief commander doesn't do anything. It's the same position with or without him. The little girl stared at him blankly and said, what about the boss's wife? What does it matter? Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. Just count the money. How much money you make in the future, just count it. When Su Chan heard this, she became happy again. Then, how much can I get? Li Yundong said seriously, you can't get a penny. At this time, everyone finally couldn't help laughing. Su Chan was so angry that she stamped her feet, and tears welled up in her eyes. She pulled Li Yundong's arm and said angrily, how can you be like this? No, absolutely not. Li Yundong laughed so hard that he squatted on the ground, covering his stomach. Su Chan tried to pull him up for a long time, but she couldn't. Seeing that Wan Hongling was laughing so exaggeratedly, she said unhappily, then what's your position? Do you know what you're in charge of? Wan Hongling snorted and was about to show off proudly, but as soon as she opened her mouth, she was a little stunned. She thought to herself, Art Director and CEO. This official title sounds impressive, but what exactly does it do? Wan Hongling thought for a while, but she couldn't figure it out, so she braced herself and said, this is Li Yundong's title. Let him explain. Su Chan immediately turned her head and looked at Li Yundong with tears in her eyes. Tell me, Yundong, tell me quickly. Li Yundong held back his laughter, stood up, and said, Art President and CEO. Wan Hongling and Su Chan nodded at the same time and said in unison, yes, what kind of position is this? What's in charge of? Li Yundong coughed dryly, adjusted his face, and said seriously, this is a little difficult to explain. How should I put it? Wan Hongling sneered, you don't even know what the official title is for. You're really something. Li Yundong didn't even look at her and said slowly, let me put it this way. I'll tell you the corresponding specific profession, and you'll understand. The meaning of art director and CEO, relatively speaking, is actually, carpenters and masons. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone suddenly burst into laughter. This time, it was Su Chan's turn to be proud. The little girl laughed so hard that her waist was like a weak willow in the wind. Wan Hongling became angry out of shame and shouted, Li Yundong, I'm not done with you. Yesterday, Shanghai Bridge was a mess, and it was a mess. The plane was at 6:30 p.m., and I didn't board until 11:30 p.m. It was already past 4 o'clock when I arrived home in Shenzhen. I didn't fall asleep until after 5 o'clock. What a tragedy. Chapter 390. Go to watch net. The next morning, Zhao Yuzhen got up early and went to the store he had just bought on the pedestrian street. Watch net. 7 K.O.M. Although Zhao Yuzhen was narrow-minded and arrogant, he was not a fool. When he first met Li Yundong, he was just a little follower of Chao Kefi, very young and inexperienced. But when he saw him again, the boy's temperament was not the same as before, and there was a large group of beautiful women around him. If a man could attract a rich beauty to favor him, then he might be a pretty boy, but if he could attract a group of beautiful women with different temperaments to surround him and obey his orders, then that was not something a pretty boy could do. Subconsciously, Zhao Yuzhen knew very well that Li Yundong was definitely not an ordinary person, but he didn't want to face it. He was more willing to believe that with his own means and strength, he could easily defeat this guy who he disliked very much. But it was not until what happened before that Zhao Yuzhen suddenly became vigilant. How dare this young man speak so arrogantly? What did he have to rely on? After Zhao Yuzhen went back, he carefully checked Li Yundong's background, but he didn't find anything. He was unwilling to give up, so he carefully checked the women around Li Yundong. This time, he was shocked. He didn't find anything about Su Chan, Zi Yuan, or Wan Hongling, but when he checked Zhou Qin, he was shocked to find that Zhou Qin was the descendant of a high-ranking official. In the land of China, the people did not fight with the officials. In the eyes of the people, Zhao Yuzhen was a great rich businessman, but in the eyes of the officials, he was at best a fart. As for whether it was a loud fart or a smelly fart, it all depended on the attitude of the officials. Fortunately, Zhao Yuzhen soon found that Zhou Qin's father, Zhou Kachang, had stepped down. Now, he was raising flowers and walking dogs at home. It seemed that he had adapted to the life of a second-line worker and had no intention of making a comeback. Only then did Zhao Yuzhen feel relieved. He thought to himself that it was a close call. If Zhou Qin's backer hadn't fallen, he would have immediately gone to ask for forgiveness. But now that Zhou Qin's backer had fallen, it was completely different. As the saying goes, the tea cools when the person is gone. How much power could an official who was removed from office because of corruption still have? However, Zhao Yuzhen had been in the business world for a long time. He knew that the business world was like the officialdom, and the officialdom was like the business world. He did not dare to be careless, for fear that the other party would take drastic measures against him, so he came to the shop in person early in the morning. It was just after 8 o'clock, and there were not many pedestrians on the street. However, Zhao Yogan's shop was already busy. A foreman saw Zhao Yuzhen and immediately greeted him with a smile, "Mr. Zhao. Why are you here so early?" Seeing that the shop was in full swing, Zhao Yuzhen nodded, put his hands behind his back, pretended to look around, and then said with a smile, "You're quite early." The foreman said with a face full of smiles, "It's all because President Zhao is paying a lot of money, and the brothers are also working enthusiastically." Zhao Yuzhen patted the foreman on the shoulder with satisfaction and said, "Well, if you do well, I still have money. By the way, if someone wants to poach you, you can tell me. I will give you a raise." The foreman felt a little strange, but he still laughed from the bottom of his heart. He said happily, "President Zhao, you are really a good boss. I have been in this industry for so many years, but I have only seen bosses who think about how to deduct workers' money. I have never seen a boss who thinks about how to pay workers more." Zhao Yuzhen was flattered by the foreman, and he felt comfortable. He also said with a smile, "Don't worry, as long as you do the work well, I won't treat you badly." The foreman nodded and bowed. "Don't worry, President Zhao. We will do our best to do your work well." Zhao Yuzhen was relieved. He took out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket, squinted at him, and said, "Want one?" The foreman was flattered. He carefully took out a cigarette from the pack and lit it happily. Then he let out a long breath and said, "I hate that I didn't meet President Zhao earlier. It's really difficult to meet a good boss like you in this world." Zhao Yuzhen smiled noncommittally. He pointed to Li Jiandong's shop and said, "If you were to do the work of the shop opposite, how long would it take for you to finish it?" The foreman suddenly looked a little embarrassed. He thought to himself, "Didn't I work in this shop before? What does President Zhao mean by that?" Zhao Yuzhen saw the uncertain expression on the foreman's face. He smiled and said, "Don't worry, I don't mean anything else. I'm just asking casually. Only then did the foreman feel relieved. He smiled and said, in my opinion, this shop can't be finished in less than a month, and it can't be opened for business in less than 2 months. Zhao Yuzhen asked, it can be decorated in a month? So fast? Then what about my shop? The foreman thought for a moment and said, it will probably take 1.5 months. Zhao Yuzhen suddenly became furious. What? This bastard's shop will only be decorated in a month, but mine will take 1.5 months. Are you kidding me? The foreman was full of grievances. He thought to himself, when I heard you say that a month is fast, I thought you thought the project time was too short and suspected that we were cutting corners. Isn't that what you want? The foreman had no choice but to say, President Zhao, how long do you want to finish it? Zhao Yuzhen said angrily, I have to be faster than them. Do you want me to watch them open before I do? Do you think that a boss like me, who earns hundreds of thousands of yuan a second, has nothing to do and comes here to open a small shop purely out of boredom? I just want to crush the shop opposite. So, you can decorate slower than all the shops in the world, but you have to be faster than them. Only then did the foreman understand. He thought to himself, I was wondering why a big boss like him would come to open a tea shop and poach us with a high salary. It turns out that he has a rival. Hey, I thought he would be a long-term boss, but I didn't expect that he would be so addicted to it. I've suffered a loss this time. The foreman regretted it in his heart, but on second thought, since it's done, why don't I extort money from this guy? In any case, it didn't matter where he was, he could do it anywhere else. The foreman made up his mind and said to Zhao Yuzhen, President Zhao, don't worry. I can finish it in 15 days at the fastest. Worst comes to worst, we can work overtime at night too. But, about the salary, then. Zhao Yuzhen immediately said, don't worry about the money. But you have to ensure the quality of this project. If you dare to fool me, I promise you that you won't get a penny left. The foreman immediately patted his chest and said, President Zhao, don't worry. Only then did Zhao Yuzhen feel relieved. He smoked and looked at the shop in front of him, sneering in his heart. Humph, you're not even fully grown yet, and you want to fight with me? I have hundreds of ways to deal with you in business. While he was feeling proud, the foreman next to him suddenly patted him on the shoulder and said, President Zhao. Zhao Yuzhen was immersed in his sweet dream. He shrank his shoulders impatiently and said, What? The foreman pointed to the left side of Zhao Yuzhen and said with his eyes wide open, Look. Zhao Yuzhen turned his head. It would have been better if he hadn't seen it, but when he saw it, his eyes suddenly popped out, and he was so shocked that he almost fell to the ground. They saw a group of young people walking toward them on the pedestrian street, led by a young man. Although he was wearing ordinary gray casual clothes, he was spirited and had an extraordinary bearing. Behind him were more than 10 beautiful women dressed in different clothes. They all had different appearances, but all of them were stunning beauties, causing the passers-by to stare at them with their mouths agape. This group of people was Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, Wan Hongling, and the fox spirits of the Fox Zen school. The most surprising thing was not their appearance, but the things they were carrying in their hands. Su Chan was carrying a large stack of wrapped snakeskin bags in one hand and a bucket full of pure water in the other. The bucket, which weighed more than 20 kilograms, was carried by Su Chan with one hand as if it were weightless. She was talking and laughing with Li Yundong as she walked. Next to her was Ruan Hongling. She held a bucket of purified water in one hand and carried it on her shoulder. In the other, she carried a huge black plastic bag. With every step she took, there was a clanking sound. It seemed to be the sound of lunch boxes and chopsticks colliding. The proud beauty of the Lingong sect was full of bad luck. She stared at Li Yundong, who was not far from her, and wanted to smash the bucket in her hand at his head. Zi Yuan was also carrying 2 huge plastic bags in her hands. They were bulging and angular, making it impossible to guess what was inside. Behind them were the little foxes of the Fox Zen School and the 3 Sherbois. Each of the little foxes was happily carrying a wooden board that was nearly as high as a person, which even 2 men could not carry. Chow Yi and the others were carrying boxes of tiles that weighed dozens of kilograms. They were all walking as if they were flying, talking and laughing, as if they were about to go on an outing in the wild. Zhao Yuzhen couldn't even close his mouth. The cigarette in his mouth fell on his clothes, burning a big hole in them. The foreman next to him was also dumbfounded. His eyes were blank and he stammered, "My God! What kind of world is this? Am I seeing things? Why are there so many beautiful women doing this kind of rough work?" At this time, Li Yundong and the others had also arrived at the door of the shop. The movement of their group attracted the attention of almost everyone around them. The workers who had been decorating the shop across the street also heard the noise and ran out to see what was going on. When they saw what was going on, they were stunned like everyone else. "I've seen people being treated like animals, but I've never seen so many beautiful women being treated like animals." Zhao Yuzhen felt that his brain had almost stopped working. He knew that he was a person who often destroyed beautiful women, but he had never expected that there would be someone in this world who was even more ruthless than him. The foreman finally recovered. He was stunned and said, What are they going to do?" Zhao Yuzhen also said in a daze, "No, I don't know." The onlookers also whispered to each other, secretly guessing the intentions and purposes of Li Yundong and the others. But before long, they saw the little foxes stack the wooden boards one by one, then open the bag of tiles and put them in the corner one by one. Li Yundong nodded with satisfaction and then said to Ziyuan, "Ziyuan, when will the cement and sand be delivered?" Obviously, Ziyuan was not used to this kind of situation. Her expression was a little strange as she said, "Probably in the afternoon." "Li Yundong, are you sure you want us to do it ourselves?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "Of course. Do you have any objections?" Ziyuan showed a rare expression of a little girl. She curled her lips and rolled her eyes at Li Yundong. "It's too late even if you have any objections now." Li Yundong laughed and said, "It's good that you know. Little foxes. The little foxes love to be lively." When others saw them doing heavy work that even men couldn't do, they thought that Li Yundong was persecuting them. However, they didn't know that the little foxes were all enjoying it. They only felt excited and fun. It was much more fun than cultivating in the mountains or staying at home. When the little foxes heard Li Yundong shout, they immediately answered in a crisp voice, "Yes." Their shouts immediately made the onlookers burst into tears. They cursed in their hearts, "Damn it, how difficult it is to find a beautiful woman these days. It's not easy to find one, but you hold her in the palm of your hand and you're afraid she'll melt. You keep her in your mouth and you're afraid she'll melt. You keep her at home and you're afraid she'll cheat on you. How difficult it is to have a beautiful wife. Damn it, there are so many beautiful women around him. Not only does he not know how to cherish them, but he even orders them around like servants." It was one thing to order them around like servants, but these beautiful women were all grinning from ear to ear, as if they had taken advantage of the heavens. Damn it, how could there be such a thing in the world? Who the hell is this man? Chapter 391. Go to Watch Network. Li Yundong didn't seem to feel the overwhelming resentment around him at all. He said to the little foxes with a smile, "In a while, you will be responsible for cleaning up the things that have been removed from the store. Pack them up and remove them. Do you understand?" The little foxes said in unison, "Yes." Li Yundong handed Chow Yi and the others a note with a smile and said, "You 3 Sherbois will be in charge of logistics. First, go and buy 3 sets of work clothes and a few sets of cleaning tools. Go to." Chow Yi and the others agreed with a smile. Li Yundong then turned his head and said to Su Chan, who was looking at him eagerly, and Wan Hongling, who was looking at him fiercely. I have other arrangements for you two later. By the way, Chana, go and get the plastic sheet you brought and cover all the transparent parts of the store. It will be bad if people outside see what we're doing inside. Li Yundong clapped his hands and said, let's go. Everyone, get to your positions and do your jobs. After that, the little girl responded with a smile and turned to get the plastic sheet. Chow Yi and the others went out of the store and went straight to the mall. The little foxes were busy with some work in the store. What about me? Zi Yuan asked blankly when she saw that they all had jobs but she didn't. Li Yundong smiled and said, you'll know when the time comes that you'll be of great use. They were busy in the store. Zhao Yuzhen and a group of renovation workers in his store were looking at them in astonishment. They had no idea what these guys were up to. But after all, the foreman and the others were professional renovation workers. After watching for a while, the foreman said in shock and doubt, could it be that they are going to renovate? Ah. Who? Them. Zhao Yuzhen seemed to have heard the funniest and most absurd joke of the century. His mouth was so wide that his fist could almost be stuffed in. He suddenly turned his head to look at the foreman and then pointed to Li Yundong's store opposite. Are you kidding me? A young man who hasn't graduated from the Chinese Department of University, with a group of delicate beauties, is going to renovate? Are you crazy, or am I? The foreman had a strange expression on his face. He stammered, Mr. Zhao, I also think I'm crazy. But what they're doing is obviously decorating. While he was talking, a renovation worker next to him suddenly pointed at Chow Yi and the others who had returned and said, look, the big bucket they bought is used to soak the tiles. Zhao Yuzhen saw Chow Yi and the others buy 7 or 8 big red buckets that were as tall as a person and enter the shop. After a while, they put down the things and turned to go out, as if they were going to make a second purchase. At this time, Su Chan jumped up and down and covered the transparent glass windows of the shop with an opaque plastic sheet. The onlookers outside could only see the moving figures inside, but they couldn't see what was going on inside. They suddenly lamented, Beauty, don't cover it up. Let us see. Was this a mosaic? Let's not look at the coded ones. Zhao Yuzhen only felt that his mind was in a mess. Li Yundong's unconventional behavior made him feel like he was falling into a cloud. No, I have to go and have a look. Zhao Yuzhen suddenly gritted his teeth and walked toward Li Yundong's shop opposite. The foreman was also so curious that he felt as if he had swallowed 25 kittens in one breath. He quickly said, I'll go and have a look, too. Unexpectedly, as soon as he said this, the workers behind him also said, I'll go too. Zhao Yuzhen suddenly turned his head and glared at the foreman. Don't you need to work? The foreman shivered, turned his head, and glared at his subordinates. Don't you need to work? These workers immediately returned to the shop resentfully and did their work listlessly, but from time to time, their eyes would look across. Li Yundong was in the shop, discussing the layout and decoration order of the whole shop with Zi Yuan. Suddenly, he saw Zhao Yuzhen push the door open and come in. He frowned slightly, folded the design drawing in his hand, and then handed it to Zi Yuan, saying, Mr. Zhao, what's the matter? Zhao Yuzhen looked around and asked tongue-tied, Little brother, what kind of play are you playing? Li Yundong said faintly, Can't you see what's going on? It's Nanawan. Mr. Zhao. Nanawan. Zhao Yuzhen was dumbfounded. The foreman next to him reacted quickly. He leaned over to his ear and whispered, It means that they are going to do it themselves. They will have enough food and clothing. With an exaggerated expression on his face, Zhao Yuzhen cried out involuntarily, Brother, do you really want to decorate this shop yourself? Li Yundong smiled slightly. What's wrong? Can't I? Zhao Yuzhen suddenly laughed out loud, as if he had heard that Yao Ming had turned into a rapper and that Obama was roasting sweet potatoes on the street. He laughed for a while, and tears came out of his eyes. Zhao Yogan's laughter was very harsh to the ears of Su Chan and the others. They felt that they had been ridiculed and despised. They looked at Zhao Yuzhen with unkind eyes, waiting for Li Yundong's order to throw him out. Li Yundong was not angry. Instead, he looked at Zhao Yuzhen with a smile on his face, as if he was looking at a monkey playing tricks. After laughing for a long time, Zhao Yuzhen stood up straight, wiped the tears from the corners of his eyes, and said, "Oh, little brother, you are really whimsical. No wonder you are a college student. Amazing. Do you know what the decoration process is?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "So what if I know? So what if I don't know?" At this time, Zhao Yuzhen only regarded Li Yundong as a reckless boy on a whim. There was disdain and contempt in his eyes as he said, little brother, you really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth." Zhao Yuzhen turned around, walked to a wall that had been smashed halfway, and said, "Little brother, I'm afraid it will take you 2 or 3 days to knock down this wall if you want 2 professional decoration workers to do it. Look at you. Where can you find people who can do this kind of rough work?" Zhao Yogan's words immediately made Su Chan and the others furious. They said in unison, "What did you say?" Zhao Yuzhen was shocked. He shrank his head and looked at the little foxes around him in horror. Li Yundong raised his hand and made a gesture to Su Chan and the others, indicating that they should not speak. Then, he walked over to the wall, touched it with his hand, and said with a smile, "Will this wall take 2 days?" The foreman next to Mr. Zhao came over and said, "Almost 2 days." Li Yundong looked at him and then said to Zhao Yuzhen, "Oh. But why do I feel that it can be done in 2 minutes? 2 minutes. Zhao Yuzhen laughed wildly. Young people are really good at bragging. Little brother, you are exaggerating. As he said this, he raised his hand, glanced at his watch, and pretended to say, "It's 3 minutes to 8:30 now. I'll give you 1 more minute. Let's see how you can do it. Hey, little brother, you're boasting too much. I think you." Before Zhao Yuzhen could finish his words, Li Yundong suddenly patted the wall lightly with his palm. Suddenly, countless cracks appeared on the wall with a crash. Then, Li Yundong gently patted the 4 corners of the wall. In less than a second, the wall collapsed with a crash. Zhao Yogan's words came to an abrupt halt. His eyes almost popped out of their sockets, and the foreman next to him almost dropped his jaw to the ground. When Su Chan and the little foxes saw the expressions of Zhao Yuzhen and the foreman, they all felt very happy and burst out laughing. Li Yundong smiled, clapped his hands, and said to Su Chan and the little foxes, "Kids, don't just stand there. Let's get to work." After that, the little foxes responded in unison and swarmed over. When they passed by Zhao Yuzhen, they deliberately bumped into him and shouted, "Good dogs don't stand in the way. What are you looking at? If you keep looking, I'll dig your eyes out. Get out of here." "Humph, now you know how powerful our leader is." Zhao Yuzhen staggered to the door. When he straightened up, he found that some of these young and beautiful women were throwing large pieces of bricks to their partners like pebbles. The partners who caught them quickly put the stones into the garbage bags they had brought. Some of them saw that some of the bricks had not been cleaned up, so they simply pulled them out with their fingers and pulled out the remaining bricks one by one. They worked together like an assembly line. In a short while, the wall was cleaned up, and even the gravel was put into the garbage bags and piled up. My God! Zhao Yuzhen only felt that everything in front of him was too unreal. He was dumbfounded and murmured in a daze, "Am I dreaming?" At this time, Su Chan came up to Zhao Yuzhen with 2 huge garbage bags filled with bricks in her hands. She glared at him and said, "Get out of my way. Don't get in the way." Only then did Zhao Yuzhen come to his senses. He felt a burning pain on his face. He walked out of Li Yundong's shop in a daze and then watched Su Chan easily throw 2 garbage bags, which weighed dozens of kilograms, into the dustbin 100 or 200 meters away. Zhao Yogan's eyes widened as he stared blankly at Su Chan. Isn't this too exaggerated? Zhao Yuzhen even began to suspect that the bricks in the 2 plastic bags were foam. After Su Chan entered the shop, he immediately turned around and ran to the garbage can. He pulled out the plastic bag, picked up a broken brick inside, and pulled it hard. This pull almost broke his fingers. Zhao Yuzhen took a deep breath and quickly threw away the brick in his hand. He looked in the direction of Li Yundong's shop in shock. Suddenly, he felt a terrible sense of threat coming at him. Under the bright sun, he shivered. Although Zhao Yuzhen didn't know what made him so afraid, he clearly felt that he had obviously underestimated Li Yundong. His previous arrogant words were showing signs of becoming a joke. Zhao Yuzhen rushed back to his shop and roared like a madman, "Everyone, work hard. We can't lose to them. I'll give you more money." As soon as these workers heard the money, they immediately became excited and agreed in unison. All of them were in full swing and full of energy. At the same time, Li Yundong, who was in the shop, said to Wan Hongling with a smile, "Now it's your turn." Wan Hongling rolled her eyes at Li Yundong. "If you tell me that you want me to do that kind of rough work, I won't let you off." Li Yundong laughed. He pointed to the thick wooden planks on the ground and said, "Show me your talent. Let's see what you can make." Wan Hongling said angrily, "How do you know that I can do carpentry? Even if I can, do I have tools? Do I have planes and saws?" Li Yundong asked curiously, "Don't you have your magical item? If you can control that thing as you please, isn't it better than any other tool?" Wan Hongling was tongue-tied and stammered, What? You want me to take the magical item and do carpentry work?" Li Yundong said with a smile, "Yes, I really can't think of anything that your magical item can't carve and make." Only then did Zi Yuan understand what Li Yundong was up to. She pursed her lips into a smile and shook her head slightly, thinking to herself, only Li Yundong can think of such a thing. Wan Hongling looked at Li Yundong as if she were looking at a visitor from outer space. Her eyes were wide open, and her gaze was complicated. There was both shock and a trace of admiration in her eyes. She thought to herself, in the entire cultivation world, whether ancient or modern, Chinese or foreign, I'm afraid that he is the only one who uses magical items to do carpentry work, right? If my master knew, he would go crazy. Chapter 392. Go to see net. While Li Yundong was holding his chin and carefully looking at Wan Hongling's masterpiece, Su Chan was staring at Li Yundong, covering her mouth with both hands. Her eyebrows were raised, and her shoulders were shrugging, as if she was trying to hold back her laughter. Go to see net. 7 K.O.M. Zi Yuan was also looking at Li Yundong. The corners of her mouth were curled up, and from time to time, she couldn't help but smile. However, Wan Hongling didn't notice it. She was focused on carving on the wooden board with her magical item. Similarly, Li Yundong was also staring at the piece of work that was about to be completed. Seeing that the engraving of the 8 immortals crossing the sea had been carved vividly by Wan Hongling, Li Yundong couldn't help but exclaim, "Not bad, it's really a work of art. But it seems that there's something missing. Then why don't you try it yourself?" Wan Hongling rolled her eyes at Li Yundong and said sarcastically. However, she only glanced at Li Yundong and saw that his head was covered with a layer of white sawdust. If he also had a big white beard on his chin, he would be a living Santa Claus. In particular, Su Chan and Zi Yuan were both looking at Li Yundong and snickering. Their expressions made Wan Hongling unable to help but burst into laughter. As soon as she laughed, she immediately lost control of her magical item and pierced a hole in the wooden board with a click. Li Yundong suddenly shouted, "What the hell? Hongling, how could you make such a low-level mistake in the end? This is the 10th wooden board you've broken. Not counting the 2 you've tried before. Wan Hongling held back her laughter and said with her hands on her hips, please, I'm not a carpenter. You can't ask so much of me. Li Yundong began to regret letting Wan Hongling do this. He said with a headache, didn't you do a good job just now? Why did you suddenly laugh? As soon as he finished speaking, the little girl couldn't help but burst into laughter. She laughed so hard that her body trembled. Wan Hongling also couldn't help but laugh. She threw a makeup mirror to Li Yundong and motioned for him to take a look. When Li Yundong saw this, he immediately drove the snow-like sawdust off his head angrily. Then, he said to Zi Yuan, who also turned around and snickered, Zi Yuan, why are you making trouble with them? I always thought you were reliable. Zi Yuan held back her laughter, turned around, and said with a smile, I also thought you were quite reliable until you decided to decorate yourself. Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Then what should we do? Now, we can't find any renovation workers, and we don't know how long we'll have to wait. There's also a group of people blocking our way with the registration funds, and some cultivators hiding in the dark, eyeing us covetously. If we don't do it ourselves, I can guarantee that this shop will have problems every day. The worst thing is that we don't have much money left from the last time we won. Seeing that Li Yundong was a little annoyed, Su Chan quickly held back her laughter and ran over to Li Yundong to help him pick up the remaining sawdust from his hair. Then, she said with a smile, Yundong, we will work hard, but we are not skilled workers. It will be fine when we are skilled. Look at how we demolished the wall just now. We are very good at it. Li Yundong patted the little girl on the forehead. You are good at destroying and tearing things down. Besides, I was the one who demolished the wall just now. Su Chan said in a coquettish voice, yes, you are our leader. We are doing small damage, and you are doing big damage. We will tear down the small ones, and you will tear down the big ones. Li Yundong couldn't help laughing. If we form a demolition team, the history of China's demolition will be rewritten by us. Wan Hongling burst out laughing. Zi Yuan shook her head and said with a smile, you'd better think about how to solve the problem in front of you first. After that, she pointed to the wooden board in front of her, which was carved with the 8 immortals crossing the sea map. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, what else can I do? Let's get another one. As he said this, Li Yundong looked down from the 2nd floor and said, there are still 3 wooden boards left for you to destroy. Li Yundong said with a look of relief, fortunately, I am wise and powerful. I bought a few more wooden boards at that time. Su Chan turned her head and said to the little foxes downstairs, bring another wooden board up. The little fox, who was closest to the wooden board, threw it upstairs without saying a word. Su Chan grabbed the wooden board, which was as tall as a person, with one hand and put it in front of her. Then she giggled and said, Yundong, how about letting me do it this time? It seems very fun. Li Yundong rolled his eyes at her. You. Forget it. I guess even if I bought all the wooden boards in Tiannan City, it wouldn't be enough for you to play with. Haven't you realized your destructive power yet? Su Chan pouted and said unhappily, of course not. I'm much better now. Li Yundong said very seriously, yes, this is also the reason why we haven't been living on the streets yet. Su Chan stamped her feet and was about to act coquettishly when she suddenly heard a vigilant shout from Chao Yi below, leader, someone wants to see you. Li Yundong was stunned and asked casually, who? Chao Yi said, the jade-faced golden monkey of the Chuanjian dragon sect, Du Fei. Li Yundong was shocked. He looked downstairs and saw Du Fei standing at the door of the shop in a suit and leather shoes, looking at him with bright eyes. Li Yundong nodded to him and said, I'll be right there. After that, he turned around and was about to go downstairs. When Li Yundong passed by her, Zi Yuan whispered, if there's a situation, warn me. Li Yundong nodded slightly. He gestured to the people of the Fox Zen school to let them all go upstairs. Then, he walked to the door of the shop, solemnly cupped his hands, and said, Jinren Du. Du Fei was wearing a black Armani suit with a red tie inside and a pair of custom-made Armani leather shoes. He looked like a business tycoon, not a cultivator who was far away from the secular world. Seeing Li Yundong greet him politely, Du Fei cupped his hands, smiled, and said, Jinren Li, we meet again. Although Li Yundong had a good impression of Du Fei, the strong possessiveness Du Fei had shown for Renyuan Jindan and the heavenly Jindan technique on Mount Gazao had made Li Yundong vigilant. He didn't dare to be careless and asked in a deep voice, Jinren Du, what can I do for you today? Du Fei saw Li Yundong standing firmly at the door like an insurmountable mountain. His expression was solemn and deep, and he was dignified without being angry. He was like a lion guarding its territory at all times. Du Fei secretly admired Li Yundong's bearing and boldness. He looked at the busy pedestrian street and the curious passers-by and said with a smile, do you want to receive guests here? Li Yundong also smiled slightly. How do I know if you are a guest or not? Du Fei laughed and said, Jinren Li is straightforward. Good. I'm not here to cause trouble today. I'm here to do business with you. Li Yundong slightly moved aside and made way for him. Then I welcome you. Please come in. Du Fei smiled as he passed by Li Yundong. He could feel that many pairs of eyes on the second floor were looking at him curiously and vigilantly. Du Fei raised his head and glanced at them. Suddenly, these eyes disappeared, and the heads that poked out shrank back at the same time. Du Fei smiled slightly. He looked around at the messy shop and said, I heard that Jinren Li wants to open a tea shop here. Li Yundong asked in surprise, how did you know? Du Fei laughed and said, Jinren Li, believe me, as long as you choose to enter the secular world to cultivate, you will have no secrets to speak of. Li Yundong smiled noncommittally and asked, well, since you are all spying on me, may I ask if you are here to issue a challenge today? A challenge? Du Fei laughed and waved his hand. Don't joke. Jinren Li first defeated the heroes in the Battle of Mount Tianlong, and then you took chestnuts from the fire of Mount Gazao, making so many cultivators of our sex come here in vain. Now, who in the cultivation world doesn't know your name, Jinren Li? Li Yundong smiled and said, that's even more troublesome. As the saying goes, people are afraid of fame as pigs are afraid of being fat. I think there should be many people who want to defeat me and get the reputation of the #1 master of the younger generation in the cultivation world, right? Seeing that Li Yundong didn't deny what had happened on Mount Gazao, Du Fei nodded to himself. He looked at Li Yundong with admiration and said, Jinren Li, I am a straightforward person and don't like to beat around the bush. I can see that you are also a straightforward person, unlike those hypocrites from other sections. Let me get straight to the point. I came here today mainly for a few things. Li Yundong also said straightforwardly, let's get straight to the point. Good. Jinren Du, please get straight to the point. Du Fei nodded. He pointed out the window and said, Jinren Li, do you know how many pairs of eyes are secretly watching you from outside? Li Yundong said lightly, I don't know, but I definitely know a lot. Du Fei said again, then do you know who is holding up the registered capital of your shop? Li Yundong's heart tightened, but the expression on his face didn't change at all. He said lightly, I don't know, and I don't want to know. Du Fei asked curiously, why? Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, Jinren Du, since you know that someone is holding our necks, it means that you are not only an insider of this matter, but also a bystander. There are only a few reasons why you stand by and do nothing. First, you want to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. Second, you want to take the opportunity to threaten us. Third, you want to sow discord and bring the trouble to others so that you can reap the benefits. In view of any of these reasons, I don't want to hear your answer. Du Fei laughed out loud. He clapped his hands and praised loudly, good. Junren Li is really smart. It's no wonder that I was defeated by you. As he said this, he suddenly raised his head and shouted to the second floor, Junren Zi Yuan, you have good taste. Junren Li is skilled in both literature and martial arts. You are really a genius. No wonder you didn't like me back then. The people on the second floor, who were eavesdropping on the conversation between Li Yundong and Du Fei, immediately looked at Zi Yuan in unison. Although she pretended to be calm, her slightly red ears betrayed her embarrassment and annoyance. Li Yundong coughed dryly and said, Junren Zi Yuan and I are good friends. Apart from that, there is no other relationship. Junren Du, please don't ruin my innocence. Please tell me something else besides what you just said. Du Fei chuckled and didn't continue to pursue this topic. He thought for a while and said, since Junren Li is not a person who likes to be controlled by others, if I say that I can provide you with a large amount of money, you will definitely not accept it, right? Li Yundong said without hesitation, no. Du Fei couldn't help but ask curiously, Junren Li, I know that you need money now. Why don't you accept my help? I won't charge you interest, and I won't ask you to do anything too excessive. Moreover, you refused me without even hearing the amount of money I wanted to provide you. Don't you feel curious and regretful? This is nothing more than my friendship and sincerity. Why did you refuse it? Have you ever thought about your disciples? Li Yundong smiled and said, it's not a pity at all. As the saying goes, those who are unaccountably solicitous are hiding evil intentions. Although I have met Junren Du a few times, I believe that the relationship between us is not deep enough for you to help me. Moreover, if I take your money, although you won't let me do anything, I have already owed you a favor. In this world, it is easy to repay a debt of money, but it is difficult to repay a debt of love. If I owe you a favor, how will I repay it in the future? Moreover, my disciples are living a good life. They are eating and drinking well. They are very happy. As he said this, Li Yundong didn't raise his head and said upstairs, isn't that right? Su Chan and the little foxes of the Fox Zen school giggled and answered in unison, yes. Li Yundong's face was full of smiles. He spread his hands at Du Fei and said, look. The girls are very happy. Du Fei took a deep look at Li Yundong. He quickly glanced at the second floor and said with a meaningful smile, it seems that Junren Li is really good at governing. You're amazing. I admire you. Li Yundong chuckled and said, Junren Du, if that's all you have to say, then I'm going to see you off. As you can see, we are busy. Du Fei smiled and said, don't be in such a hurry to leave. Junren Li, in fact, I came here this time because I have a good deal. I don't know if you are interested. See. Chapter 393. Go to watch net. Li Yundong replied casually, oh. What kind of deal? Du Fei saw Li Yundong's lack of interest, but he didn't mind. He just took out a colorful brocade pouch from his pocket and gently untied the ribbon tied to it. Go to watch net. In an instant, the 7-treasure brocade pouch emitted a bright brilliance. Du Fei reached into the pouch and took out a yellow thread-bound book. He held the brocade pouch with one hand and the book with the other. He gently blew on it, and then lifted the book with his hand, making it float in the air and face Li Yundong vertically. Li Yundong took a closer look and saw that the pages of the book seemed to be a little damaged because of the age, but the handwriting on the cover was very clear. There were 4 big words, Magic Implement Illustrated Handbook. Magic Implement Illustrated Handbook. Li Yundong read it out softly. Although he had read a lot of ancient books of Buddhism and Taoism, most of them were about cultivation theory. They had almost nothing to do with specific Taoist magic arts and magic items. Li Yundong also knew very well that since ancient times, it had been impossible for Buddhism and Taoism to print real Shintong magic arts and pass them down to the world. Even if there were, it would only be an extremely secret treasure of the sect. Therefore, although Li Yundong had read so many ancient books of Buddhism and Taoism, he still didn't immediately realize what the book in Du Fei's hand was. But soon, Wan Hongling and Su Chan on the second floor poked their heads out at the same time and exclaimed, "Magic Implement Illustrated Handbook." Su Chan stared at the book and blurted out, "Is it the Magic Implement Illustrated Handbook written by Taoist Bin Zhu and his followers in the Ming Dynasty?" Li Yundong tilted his head slightly and asked, "You know about it? Can you explain it?" Just as Su Chan was about to speak, Wan Hongling rushed to say, "Li Yundong, you are the leader of a sect, but you don't even know about the Magic Implement Illustrated Handbook. Listen carefully. The Illustrated Handbook of Magical Instruments was written by Zhu Qingyong, the king of Qin, the fifth grandson of Zhu Yuanzhang of the Ming Dynasty. He spent more than 10 years with his followers to compile the Illustrated Handbook of Magical Instruments. It recorded all the magical instruments of various sects and schools, as well as their attributes, characteristics, grades, and shapes." Li Yunyang was shocked. He knew that he had suffered a great loss on Mount Gazao because he didn't know the fairy tying rope. Moreover, if a person's magic treasure was not familiar with the opponent's, then it was equivalent to having the advantage of being in the dark while the opponent was in the light. Naturally, the opponent would have a great advantage in a fight. Moreover, there were so many Dharma treasures in the world. If it wasn't a battle, it was impossible to see the other party's Dharma treasure, let alone know the characteristics of the other party's Dharma treasure. If he had this artifact illustration handbook, he would be able to gain the upper hand in a fight with anyone. Du Fei looked up at Wan Hongling in surprise, then smiled sarcastically. "Junrenli, does your disciple know more than you?" Li Yundong smiled. "Firstly, she's not my disciple. Secondly, if you know something, you know something. If you don't know something, you don't know something. Ignorance isn't scary. What's scary is pretending to be omniscient despite being ignorant. Thirdly, I've only cultivated for less than half a year, so I definitely don't know as much as you do. There's nothing to be ashamed of." At first, there was a hint of contempt and mockery in the smile on Du Fei's face, but when he heard the latter part, he was suddenly moved. "Junrenli, are you kidding? You've only cultivated for less than half a year." Li Yundong smiled slightly. He raised his head and said to Su Chan, "Girl, how long have we known each other?" Su Chan smiled and blinked at Li Yundong on the second floor. She said sweetly in her heart, "More than half a year." Li Yundong lowered his head and said to Du Fei with a smile, "Well, let me correct you. A little more than half a year." Du Fei looked at Li Yundong in shock. After a long while, he solemnly cupped his hands to Li Yundong in disbelief. "Junrenli, I admire you. I admire you." Li Yundong also cupped his hands and smiled slightly. "Thank you very much. Shall we continue?" Only then did Du Fei come to his senses. He still looked at Li Yundong in disbelief before taking out the second item from the colorful brocade pouch. He said, "I believe that with your wisdom, Junrenli, you must know what the artifact illustration means to a cultivator." Li Yundong nodded slowly and said, "Of course I know. But please continue. What is this thing you're taking out now?" Du Fei was holding a simple and unadorned blue-gray glass bowl in his hand. He smiled slightly and said, "If you have the artifact illustration in your hand, Junrenli, you will know what kind of magical item it is in my hand." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Since you know that I don't have the artifact illustration in my hand, just tell me." Du Fei smiled and explained, "This is the burning thumb pot." The burning thumb pot? Li Yundong was confused. He didn't know what kind of magical item it was. However, Wan Hongling and Su Chan exclaimed at the same time, "The burning thumb pot?" This time, Chao Yi and Zhuang Yiting couldn't help but poke their heads out of the second floor in surprise. They cried out involuntarily, "Is this a Buddhist magical item, the burning thumb pot?" Li Yundong saw that they were all looking at the gray and dirty glass bowl in shock. He spread his hands and said to them, "Does anyone want to explain?" Su Chan rushed to say, "Yundong, this is Fahai's magical item." Fahai? Li Yundong was shocked. The Fahai in the legend of the White Snake? Is there really such a person? He has a magical item that has been passed down to the world. Wan Hongling also said quickly, Fahai is the disciple of Huineng, the sixth patriarch of the Zen sect of Buddhism. He is also the son of Pei Xiu, the minister of the Ministry of Personnel during the Daizhong period of Emperor Xuanzong of the Tang dynasty. After Fahai became a monk, he made a burning finger oath for the sake of Zixin Temple. In the future, the magical item he carried with him was called the burning thumb pot. Li Yundong looked at the burning thumb pot in Du Fei's hand with a shocked expression. Damn, is this the magical item that subdued by Suzhen? Du Fei laughed and said, Zhenrenli, you must be joking. The legend of the White Snake is just a folk legend. Don't take it seriously. Li Yundong also laughed. That's right. In the journey to the west, it was said that Zhu Beiji was Marshal Tianping. The two of them laughed, and their vigilance and grudges suddenly dissipated a lot. Du Fei held the burning thumb pot in the air and let it float side by side with the magical implement encyclopedia in front of him. He said, Zhenrenli, I won't say much about other things, but since it is Fahai's magical item, it must be very powerful. And I believe that they all know it very well. As he spoke, he pointed to Su Chan and the others, who had poked their heads out of the second floor. Li Yundong looked up and saw that Su Chan and Wan Hongling were staring at the burning thumb pot with their eyes wide open in curiosity and surprise. Chao Yi and Zhuang Yiting were looking at the magical item with complicated expressions. They didn't say a word, but Lu Yuehong, who was also a Shibwa of the Fox Zen school, looked at them blankly, as if she didn't understand what was so shocking about this magical item. Li Yundong withdrew his gaze, looked at Du Fei, and said, Since this is Fahai's magical item, why did it fall into your hands? Du Fei smiled mysteriously. That's a secret of our sect. Zhenrenli, if you're interested, you might as well wait for me to take out the third and last item before you ask. Li Yundong saw that Du Fei had taken out two things in a row, one more amazing than the other. He couldn't help but be a little curious and expectant. What would the third item be? Seeing that Li Yundong was tempted, Du Fei smiled proudly and pulled the string of the treasure bag. Immediately, a navy blue hardcover thread-bound book flew out of the bag one after another. Li Yundong saw that these books were coming one after another. Soon, they almost occupied half of the hall, piling up like a small mountain. He couldn't help laughing. What is this? Is it the Siku Quan Shu? Du Fei's expression revealed a trace of pride and pride that couldn't be concealed. He opened the first book, then opened it to Li Yundong and said, Zhenrenli, please take a look. Li Yundong saw 4 golden characters written in golden seal script on the book. He read softly, Dao Fa Hui Yuan. What? Dao Fa Hui Yuan. Except for Li Yundong, everyone exclaimed in unison and poked their heads out. Zi Yuan's expression changed when she heard this. Her figure flashed and she instantly came to Li Yundong's side. She stared at the ancient book in front of Du Fei with her eyes wide open, and her voice trembled a little. This is really Dao Fa Hui Yuan. Is this the Dao Fa Hui Yuan written by Zhao Yizhen at the end of the Yuan dynasty and the beginning of the Ming dynasty? Li Yundong and Zi Yuan had been together for a long time. Although he knew that this fairy sometimes lost her composure, he had never seen her so shocked. He couldn't help but be shocked and thought to himself, what kind of treasure is this? How can it make Zi Yuan so shocked? Du Fei also knew that Li Yundong hadn't cultivated for long and didn't know much about these things, so he explained, genuinely, look. As he spoke, he pointed to the pile of books in front of him and said, there are a total of 268 books here, which record the most glorious period of our Taoism, that is, almost all the Taoist magic and secret history of the Song, Yuan and Ming dynasties. Du Fei pointed to the pile of books in front of him, which was nearly as tall as a person, and said, here are the first to 55th volumes, which are all the Taoist magic of the Qingwei sect. The 56th to the 154th volumes are all the Taoist magic of the Xinqiao sect. The 155th to 268th volumes are most of the Taoist magic of the Jingyi sect, the Tianqin sect, the Donghua sect, and the Jingming sect, as well as all the Taoist magic of some small sects. Du Fei's words were light, but for Li Yundong and the others, it was like an atomic bomb had detonated among them. Li Yundong was so shocked that his scalp went numb. He looked at the books in the small room dumbfoundedly and said, You mean that almost all the Taoist magic is here? Du Fei smiled slightly and said, exactly. Li Yundong was dumbfounded. Since he had reached the Zhuji phase, although he had won every battle, he knew very well that what he lacked the most were Taoist magic skills. But now that he was sleepy, someone had immediately sent him a pillow. This is too exaggerated, isn't it? Almost all the Taoist magic. Zi Yuan looked at Du Fei in disbelief. She asked, hasn't this ancient book been lost for generations? Why is it here? Du Fei said with a smile, it's not here, but here in our Chuanjian dragon sect. Since the Tartars entered the pass and the Taoists were suppressed, people have been constantly robbing and destroying this ancient book. For the future of the Taoists, our Chuanjian dragon sect has done everything possible to preserve this ancient book from being destroyed by the Tartars. But in modern times, the Taoists declined greatly, especially during the 10 years of turmoil. Our Grand Master's bones were dug up, the ancestral court of the Jingyi sect was destroyed, and the cultivation world was almost destroyed. At this time, the leader of our Chuanjian dragon sect decided to transfer the power of the sect abroad, so he dismissed many disciples and let them take away some of the ancient books of the Dao Fa Hui Yuan. After the reform and opening up, the leader ordered his disciples to contact the disciples who had left at that time and reassemble this ancient book. Du Fei said proudly, since the reform and opening up, all the sects have shown signs of recovery. The Jingyi sect is busy dominating the cultivation world, the Gezhou sect is busy refining elixirs, and our Chuanjian dragon sect is busy collecting Taoist ancient books to preserve the bloodline of the cultivation world and do our best. Zi Yuan's face was full of solemnity. She cupped her hands in admiration and said, Zhenren Du is so broad-minded. I admire you. Du Fei cupped his hands and said with a smile, you're welcome. I'm just a pawn. I don't dare to accept this kind of praise. However, because we left in a hurry, some of the disciples of the sect hid themselves very well all over the world. It took our sect nearly 30 years to reappear in the world. Li Yundong was shocked when he heard this. He knew how huge of a project it would be to find the things that had been scattered all over the world 40 years ago. How much manpower and material resources would it take? Li Yundong couldn't imagine it. He had been quite proud of the beautiful women in his Fox Zen school before, but now he knew what a real sect was and what a real power was. In times of crisis, it could immediately spread its branches all over the world and hide for decades. It was like a divine dragon hiding under the 9 earths, not letting anyone find it at all. This was a sect. When it flourished, it would be able to find the people and things that had been hidden under the 9 earths in the past few decades. Everything would be intact and untouched. This was called power. Moreover, the Dao Fa Hui Yuan that the Chuanjian dragon sect had spent 30 years to collect was actually placed in front of him and wanted to make a deal with him. If such an important thing could be used to make a deal, then what did Du Fei want? Li Yundong looked at the pile of books. He calmed down and asked very seriously, you took out 3 things, one more shocking than the other. What you want must be more important. What kind of deal do you want to make? Du Fei laughed, clapped his hands, and said, Jinren Li is really straightforward. Well, I'll be straightforward. I'll exchange the implement encyclopedia, the burning thumb pot, and the Dao Fa Hui Yuan with you for 2 things. 3 for 2. I promise you won't suffer a loss. See. Chapter 394. Go to the net. 3 for 2. Li Yundong's eyes narrowed involuntarily, and 2 sharp rays of light shot out of his eyes. What 2 things? Du Fei confidently raised 2 fingers. Renyuan Jindan and the Heavenly Jindan technique. Li Yundong's heart tightened. He thought to himself, it's really these 2 things. At this time, the Fox Zen school also let out a soft exclamation and sigh. They all knew that the Renyuan Jindan had been taken by Zhou Qin, so it was impossible for them to change it. To watch the net. Li Yundong stared at Du Fei and said, Jinren Du, as the saying goes, don't lie in front of Jinren. We can't make this deal. Du Fei was shocked, and his face suddenly darkened. Jinren Li, are you still dissatisfied with these 3 things? Li Yundong shook his head and said, no. Du Fei said in a low voice, then why do you look down on these 3 things? If there's anything you like, just tell us. As long as our Chuanjian Dragon sect has it, or as long as we have the ability to get it, we'll definitely get it for you. Li Yundong chuckled. Not really. Du Fei's eyebrows were tightly knitted together. Then, Jinren Li, what do you mean? Li Yundong said lightly, I don't mean anything else. It's just that I don't have what you want. Du Fei's expression changed. Jinren Li, I show my sincerity to others. Why don't you treat me with sincerity? Are you looking down on me, Du Fei? Li Yundong waved his hand and said, no, Jinren Du, you think too much. Since you treat me with sincerity, I'll treat you with sincerity. Since you've taken out 3 precious items to make a deal with me, I won't hide anything either. Indeed, I was the one who snatched the Renyuan Jindan, and I have indeed practiced the Heavenly Golden Core technique. Du Fei was puzzled and said, Jinren Li, why don't you want to make a deal? Could it be that, you've already taken the Renyuan Jindan? Li Yunyang nodded slowly and said, yes, but I didn't take it. It was my disciple. Du Fei raised his head, his face filled with unconcealable disappointment and envy. Who is the one with such good fortune? Can I get to know you? Li Yundong smiled and said, she's not here. Sorry to disappoint you. Du Fei let out a long sigh. His expression was extremely disappointed. He lowered his head and didn't speak for a long time. After a long time, he took a deep breath and waved his hand, putting away the Dao Fa Hui Yuan, the burning thumb pot, and the magic weapon encyclopedia. Li Yundong looked at the dejected Du Fei and comforted him, Jinren Du, don't be so discouraged. Maybe there is a 3rd Renyuan Jindan. Du Fei forced a smile and cupped his hands. Jinren Li, you don't have to persuade me with kind words. I think I don't have such an opportunity. He walked to the door with heavy steps, then turned around and said with a forced smile, Jinren Li, I have a presumptuous request. Li Yundong said with a faint smile, please go ahead. Can you not teach the Heavenly Jindan technique to other sects? Du Fei looked at Li Yundong eagerly and somewhat pleadingly. Li Yundong said, of course. Du Fei breathed a sigh of relief. A gentleman keeps his word. Jinren Li, if you have another Renyuan Jindan in the future, you might as well contact me. As he spoke, he took out a gold-plated business card from his pocket. With a wave of his hand, the business card flew lightly into Li Yundong's hand. Li Yundong caught it with both hands and glanced at it, only to see the words, Du Fei, President of Asia of Chuanjian Dragon Sect Limited Company, written on it. Li Yundong smiled and said, "What a magnificent name. What kind of business does the Chuanjian Dragon sect do?" Ever since Du Fei had learned that Li Yundong had taken away the Renyuan Jindan, he had been preparing these three things. However, when he finally came to find Li Yundong, it was still a step too late. Especially when he heard that the Renyuan Jindan had been taken, he was a little dispirited. However, out of courtesy, Du Fei still forced himself to say, "I'm sorry to make you laugh, Jinrenli. It's just a small business. However, I am an outer disciple. Although I entered the sect early, I can't enter the inner room and become an inner disciple. Therefore, although I am the eldest Shixiang, my cultivation is actually low in the Chuanjian Dragon sect." Li Yundong asked curiously, "Then how many people do you have in the Chuanjian Dragon sect? Who are the masters?" Du Fei thought for a moment and said, "Jinrenli, this is a secret of our sect. It can't be spread. However, what I can tell you is that there are many masters in our sect, and there are countless people who are more powerful than me. At the Taoist assembly, you will be able to see them." Li Yundong understood. He smiled and said, "I see, Jinren, I won't see you off. Goodbye." Du Fei cupped his hands and pushed open the door. Just as he was about to go out, he glanced around and suddenly stopped. He turned around and said, "Jinrenli, there's something I don't know if I should say or not." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Please go ahead." Du Fei gestured at the surroundings with his eyes and said, "Jinrenli, you want to open a tea shop, but as far as I know, there are many people waiting to teach you a lesson on the day of your opening ceremony." Li Yundong laughed out loud. His laughter was so loud that it spread out through the open door of the shop. "You want to teach me a lesson? Well, I'm afraid that day won't be lively and interesting." Du Fei smiled slightly and cupped his hands in admiration. "Jinrenli, you are so heroic. I admire you." Du Fei will take his leave now. Li Yundong cupped his hands and returned the salute. "I won't see you off." Their actions made many pedestrians and tourists on the street whisper to themselves, "What era are they in? Why are they still speaking so politely and cupping their hands? They've watched too many stupid period dramas. They're really crazy." Some cultivators of various sects who mingled among the secular mortals sneered in their hearts when they heard this. They took a deep look at Li Yundong and then disappeared into the crowd. Zhao Yuzhen, who was opposite Li Yundong's shop, also heard Li Yundong's words clearly. He sneered and quickly moved in his heart. "Yes, on the day this guy opens his business, if I can make his opening ceremony cold and cheerless, humph, it will definitely cause a big blow to him. Yes, that's what I'll do. If anyone comes to congratulate you, I'll find a way to drive them all away. Even if it's a feast, I'll ruin it for you." Zhao Yuzhen, who had thought of another way, suddenly felt much more relaxed. He laughed proudly and even hummed a song lightly. In Li Yundong's shop, there was already a commotion. One Hongling shouted at Li Yundong, "Li Yundong, why don't you exchange the Heavenly Jindan technique with him? Use the Heavenly Jindan technique to exchange for Taoist Fa Huiyuan." Li Yundong smiled and said, "The Heavenly Jindan technique is just a kind of cultivation magic of Taoism, but Taoist Fa Huiyuan records almost all the magic of Taoism. You're using a sapling to exchange for a forest. Do you think Du Fei is as stupid as you?" One Hongling was so angry that she was about to speak, but Su Chan beat her to it and said, "Yundong, it would be good to exchange for the manual." Chao Yi also nodded and said, "Leader, anyway, you already have the Heavenly Jindan technique. Why don't you use it to make a deal with Du Fei? You can even exchange it for the burning thumb pot. This is a famous powerful Buddhist weapon." Li Yundong laughed and said, "There are some things that I can't exchange for just because I want to. Du Fei clearly wants the Renyuan Jindan and the Heavenly Jindan technique. He won't trade for anything less. If it doesn't work." Li Yundong smiled at Su Chan and said, I'll use you as a bonus and ask Du Fei if I exchange you and the heavenly Jindan technique for the 3 treasures with him. Would he trade? Su Chan made a face at Li Yundong, and her little nose wrinkled cutely. She said coquettishly, "You're so annoying. Are you finally disgusted with me? I'm not a commodity." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Goods don't have legs, but you do. You can run back by yourself in the future." Su Chan blinked and looked at Li Yundong innocently. "But what if I don't know the way back? What should I do?" Looking at the cute little girl, Li Yundong couldn't help but laugh. At this time, Zi Yuan suddenly winked at Li Yundong and whispered, "Li Yundong, I have something to tell you." Li Yundong nodded and went to a corner with Zi Yuan. Zi Yuan whispered, "Li Yundong, if you have the Renyuan Jindan in your hand, would you exchange it?" Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, "No." Zi Yuan asked with interest, "Oh, why?" Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, "It seems that I'm taking advantage of this deal, but in fact, it's not." There was a trace of appreciation in Zi Yuan's eyes. "Why is that?" Li Yundong said, "Since the Chuanjian dragon sect has collected so many Taoist magic, why are they still not a match for the Zhengyi school? There are several reasons for this. First, this Dao Fa Huiyuan may be fake. Second, this Dao Fa Huiyuan is not complete. Third, this Dao Fa Huiyuan is real, but it is not as powerful as imagined." Zi Yuan nodded and praised, "Not bad. You can think of so many things in such a short time. It's really good." Li Yundong also asked curiously, "Since you know these points, why were you so shocked just now?" Zi Yuan sighed softly and said, "So far, many Taoist classics have been lost, and many Taoist magic spells have been lost. Dao Fa Huiyuan is undoubtedly a great treasure trove of Taoist magic spells. As a cultivator, I was naturally very excited when I suddenly heard that someone had restored Dao Fa Huiyuan. However, what you said before is actually not correct." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Then why are you praising me?" Zi Yuan smiled and said softly, "It's not like that. Listen to me. There are thousands of Taoist magic spells, but from ancient times until now, no one has ever been able to learn all of them. To be proficient in several great Shentong is enough to be called a great cultivator. As the saying goes, it's better to know more than one. If you learn the 5 Thunder Jade method, it will be enough for you to use in fights. Don't bite off more than you can chew." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "Thank you for your advice. Did you come to me alone because of this?" Zi Yuan straightened her face and said, "Of course not." She lowered her voice and said, "Did you notice anything strange today?" Li Yundong narrowed his eyes slightly. "What strange thing?" Zi Yuan glanced at Chao Yi, Zhuang Yiting, and Lu Yuehong on the second floor and said, "Didn't you notice that when Du Fei took out the burning thumb pot just now, Chao Yi and Zhuang Yiting were very shocked, while Lu Yuehong looked indifferent? After a while, he said in a low voice that only Ziyuan could hear, 'I think I understand what you mean. But now Yen Fong probably knows that we have found her whereabouts, but she still hasn't chosen to escape. This means that she may be deliberately creating chaos between us and making us suspect each other.'" Ziyuan nodded and said, "I think I understand what you mean. But now it's very likely that Yen Fong already knows that we have discovered her whereabouts, but she still hasn't chosen to escape. This means that she may deliberately cause chaos between us and make us suspect each other. Since that's the case, I'll play with her slowly." A cold smile appeared in Li Yundong's eyes. "I'd like to see what she's up to." Zi Yuan also smiled and said, "I'll keep an eye on her for you. However, there's one more thing I want to talk to you about." Li Yundong asked, "What is it?" Zi Yuan smiled mysteriously. "If you do this well, I believe that she will definitely give herself away." Li Yundong couldn't help but be curious. "What on earth is it?" Zi Yuan whispered a few words in Li Yundong's ear. Li Yundong immediately fell silent, but after thinking for a while, he raised his head and nodded slightly at Zi Yuan. Okay, but I have an opinion. As he said this, he whispered a few more words in Zi Yuan's ear. Zi Yuan's heart skipped a beat. She looked at Li Yundong with appreciation and nodded slightly. Well, I think so too. The two of them looked at each other and smiled, suddenly feeling like confidants. See. Chapter 395. Go to Watch Network. On the afternoon that Li Yundong was busy decorating the shop with Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Wan Hongling, and the disciples of the Fox Zen school, Zhou Qin finally opened her eyes from an extremely deep sleep. Zhou Qin's slender eyelashes fluttered gently. She lay motionless on the bed, staring at the ceiling with her beautiful eyes, as if she was trying to recall what had happened when she had been meditating in the past few days. But what she thought about the most was not the changes that had taken place after she had taken the Renyuan Jindan, but the fact that Li Yundong had been taking care of her all the time after she had taken the Renyuan Jindan. He had even gently wiped the sweat off her body. Thinking of this, Zhou Qin couldn't help but feel a little hot all over. Her fingers gently brushed across her satin skin, and the place where her fingertips touched felt as hot as fire. Enemy. Zhou Qin bit her lip and sighed softly. She didn't know how much time had passed before she slowly sat up. She placed her hand on the corner of the bedside table, trying to get herself to stand up. But as soon as she did, there was a cracking sound. The leg of the bedside table was broken by her fingers. Zhou Qin was taken aback. She looked at the broken piece of wood in her palm in surprise, as if she couldn't understand it, but soon she understood. All of a sudden, she remembered the series of unbelievable things she had seen Li Yundong do. Li Yundong had been bleeding from all 7 of his orifices, smashing the marble countertop with his bare hands, dodging Zhao Yujian's gunshot in the classroom, catching her falling from the sky, and sending the Lincoln limousine flying. At this moment, Zhou Qin personally experienced the feeling of this superhuman power flowing through her body. At this moment, she was in a trance, confused, and at a loss for what to do. Suddenly, there was the sound of voices and footsteps outside the door. Zhou Qin came to her senses. She put on her clothes and walked outside the door, only to see Su Chan and Zi Yuan walking into the house. Su Chan saw Zhou Qin at a glance and shouted with surprise and joy, "Sister Zhou Qin, you're awake." The little girl had been so busy these past few days that she was a little travel-worn. Her delicate and pretty face was covered with dirt and grime, making her look like a little tabby cat. However, her straightforward and innocent smile did not diminish her beauty in the slightest. Instead, it made her even more adorable. She carefully looked Zhou Qin up and down, nodded slightly, and said with a smile, "Not bad, your brilliance is revealed, and your eyes are clear." "Good, good." Zhou Qin didn't know whether Zi Yuan was talking about her current situation or the Renyuan Jindan. She smiled politely and asked, "Where is everyone? Why aren't they here?" Su Chan said with a smile, "We're busy with the decoration of the shop." Zhou Qin was stunned. "Shop? Ah, Desanxian. Are you starting to renovate now? But, decorating, how did you?" Su Chan looked at herself and also felt that she was like a clay doll. The little girl stuck out her tongue and said with a smile, "We did it ourselves. We just moved the cement and sand, so we're a little dirty. Yundong asked me to come back and wash first." Zhou Qin looked at the spotless Zi Yuan in confusion. "Then you," Zi Yuan smiled slightly and explained, "Yundong was worried about Su Chan coming back alone, so he asked me to accompany her back." Zhou Qin glanced at Su Chan. Before she could show a look of admiration and envy, Su Chan took her hand with a smile and said, "Sister Zhou Qin, you've changed so much. You look like a different person from before." Zhou Qin couldn't help laughing. Is it that obvious? Su Chan nodded hard, then turned to look at Zi Yuan. Sister Zi Yuan, what do you think? Zi Yuan smiled and said, of course. Now Zhou Qin's whole body is full of qi, and her aura is amazing. I estimate that after a few more days of cultivation, she can go to the Zhuji phase. Su Chan looked at Zhou Qin enviously. Sister Zhou Qin, your cultivation speed is really fast. You're even faster than Yundong. Zhou Qin smiled unnaturally. She changed the topic and asked, where's Master? Is he also in the shop? Su Chan said with a smile, yes, Sister Zhou Qin, do you want to go to the shop and have a look? Zhou Qin smiled and said, okay, wait for me to change my clothes. Su Chan also stuck out her tongue. I'm going to take a shower. After that, she rushed into the bathroom. Zhou Qin smiled at Zi Yuan. She turned around and wanted to go into her room to change clothes, but Zi Yuan stopped her. Zhou Qin. Zhou Qin stopped, turned around, and looked at Zi Yuan with a complicated look in her eyes. She didn't talk much with this beautiful woman with an extraordinary temperament. Deep in her heart, Zhou Qin could even accept the innocent Su Chan, but she was a little reluctant to get close to Zi Yuan. It was not only because both of them were extremely beautiful, but also because Zhou Qin subconsciously wanted to compete with Zi Yuan. No matter what, she was an extremely outstanding woman in all aspects. Obviously, Zi Yuan was the same. Moreover, Zi Yuan was even half a master of Li Yundong in cultivation. This made Zhou Qin feel that when she stood in front of Zi Yuan, she was subconsciously half a head shorter. She didn't like this feeling very much. Zi Yuan was keenly aware of a strong competitive spirit from Zhou Qin's eyes. She quickly chose to give in. This dignified and gentle woman, who was usually kind and dignified, smiled slightly and said, it's nothing. Go about your business. I won't disturb you. Zhou Qin gave Zi Yuan a meaningful look. She also smiled and went into her room. Zi Yuan looked at Zhou Qin's figure and shook her head secretly. She had wanted to ask Zhou Qin what she had been thinking about when she was meditating, but at this time, Zhou Qin showed a sense of alienation, so Zi Yuan decided to leave this question to Li Yundong. Zi Yuan stood where she was for a while, then turned to leave. But when she walked out of the door and came to the corridor, she saw Li Yundong coming back with the people of the Fox Zen school. Zi Yuan smiled and said, why are you back? Li Yundong walked at the front. He laughed and said, everything is done. Why didn't you come back? Zi Yuan asked in confusion, didn't you say that we were going to lay tiles today? Li Yundong spread out his hands and said, the tiles need to be soaked for a while before they can be used. We might as well do it tomorrow. Zi Yuan glanced at them, but she didn't see Ruan Hongling. She asked curiously, where's Hongling? Li Yundong smiled and said, Hongling said that when she saw Zhao Yuzhen leave in the morning, there was anger in her eyes. She felt that this guy was likely to take the opportunity to make trouble at night, so she decided to stay there. Zi Yuan smiled and said, no, Hongling has always been careless. How could she pay attention to this? You must have given her some kind of magic potion to make her stay willingly. Li Yundong pointed at Zi Yuan and said with a smile, my parents gave birth to me, and Zi Yuan knows me best. At this time, the little foxes all entered the house together. As soon as they entered the house, they began to chatter and shout, I'm so tired. I'm so tired. Leader, do you have water to drink? Leader, when will we have dinner? Who's in the bathroom? I want to take a bath. Idiot, don't you have a bathroom in your room? But there's a bathtub outside. When Li Yundong saw that they had entered the room, he immediately felt as if he had been drowned out by the noise of a flock of ducks. He raised his hands high and made a gesture to press them down. Don't make noise, be quiet. As soon as Li Yundong said this, the little foxes immediately shut their mouths and looked at him eagerly. At this time, the bathroom door opened with a whoosh. Su Chan rushed out wrapped in a bath towel and her head was covered in bubbles. She said in surprise, "Yundong, you're back." But as soon as she moved, the shampoo on her head flowed into her eyes. The little girl suddenly jumped up and rushed into the bathroom again. "Ouch, it hurts." The little foxes burst out laughing. Li Yundong shook his head with a defeated expression on his face. He coughed dryly and said, "Everyone has worked hard today. In the evening, Junren Ziyuan and I will cook delicious food to reward everyone." Hooray! The little foxes cheered in unison. Li Yundong smiled and said to Ziyuan, "Junren Ziyuan, do you have any objections?" Ziyuan said helplessly, "You act first and report later." "Why are you asking me?" As she said this, she wanted to walk out the door. Li Yundong hurriedly asked, "Hey, you don't have to leave even if you're angry." Ziyuan looked back and smiled. "I'm going to buy some vegetables." Li Yundong immediately felt relieved. Looking at Ziyuan's graceful and moving back, he suddenly felt that Ziyuan was simply the perfect wife that any man in the world yearned for. It seemed that she would never complain and would only support him silently. But, if she is a wife, then what is Su Chan? Such a question popped up in Li Yundong's mind for no reason. He was shocked and quickly shook his head, as if he wanted to drive this idea out of his mind. While Li Yundong was shaking his head, he suddenly saw a familiar figure leaning against the door, silently watching him. He turned his head and saw Zhou Qin standing at the door. Her graceful body was leaning against the door, like a weak willow in the wind, making people feel pity for her. Li Yundong was stunned and then said in surprise, "Zhou Qin, you're awake." After he said this, the whole living room fell silent in an instant. Everyone in the Fox Zen school looked at Zhou Qin in unison, looking at the lucky girl who had taken the Renyuan Jindan. Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong with infatuation. Her hands unconsciously tightened in front of her chest and curled up into a ball. Li Yundong didn't notice Zhou Qin's infatuated gaze. He waved to the little foxes and motioned for them to go about their own business. Then, he went upstairs and waved to Zhou Qin, motioning for her to enter his room. Li Yundong led Zhou Qin in and then closed the door behind him. He looked her up and down carefully, his eyes full of admiration. He nodded repeatedly and said, "Good, good, good. The qi in your body is even more vigorous than mine before. Very good, very good. By the way, when you were meditating, I reminded you to visualize. Did you do it?" Ever since she had entered Li Yundong's room, her heart had been beating like a drum. She was afraid that Li Yundong would mention the embarrassing scene of him taking off her clothes, but when she saw that Li Yundong was asking about her cultivation as soon as he opened his mouth, she felt relieved and immediately felt a strong sense of disappointment. Zhou Qin sighed slightly in her heart. She cheered herself up and said, "Master, I have visualized." Li Yundong asked with concern, "What is the self-deity you visualized?" Zhou Qin's eyes drooped slightly, as if she was recalling the scene at that time. After a while, she said with some embarrassment, "I visualized myself as a fairy." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Then do you still need to visualize?" "You are now." Zhou Qin's cheeks turned red. She stole a glance at Li Yundong and was secretly delighted. She said softly, "I don't know what kind of deity I visualized. Anyway, it was very beautiful and otherworldly. However, there was a sword on its back, a red whip wrapped around its waist, and a silver moon hanging behind its head. It seemed to be the chilling chakram that you gave me, Master." Li Yundong laughed and said, "Yes, this will be your magical item in the future. But after that, I asked you to try to visualize the lotus throne. Did you do it?" Zhou Qin nodded. "Yes." Li Yundong asked again, how many lotus thrones did you visualize? Zhou Qin said casually, 9 lotus thrones. Li Yundong was shocked. His eyes widened and he cried out involuntarily, 9. Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong blankly. Yes, what's wrong? Li Yundong clapped his hands and laughed. He was overjoyed. Good, good, good. At that time, I also visualized 9 lotus thrones. Su Chan praised me as a rare genius in 100 years. Moreover, Master Feikong also said that the most difficult thing in cultivation is to find a good disciple. I didn't expect that the first disciple I accepted would be a rare genius like me. This is really amazing. Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong with some amusement. She asked, Master, are you praising yourself or me? Li Yundong chuckled and said, praise them all. While he was talking, he suddenly saw the door being pushed open. Su Chan poked her head in and glanced at Li Yundong and Zhou Qin. She asked softly, Yundong, can I come in? Seeing that she didn't knock on the door, Li Yundong put on a straight face and pretended to be angry. No, I'm teaching a disciple. Su Chan suddenly pouted. Li Yundong wrinkled his nose, made a face, and retracted his head with a resentful expression. Li Yundong saw that after Su Chan left, he did not close the door. The door was just ajar. He laughed and said in a clear voice, You little girl, why are you hiding at the door and eavesdropping? If you don't trust me, you might as well come in and listen openly. Su Chan immediately shouted, Who's worried about you? Humph, I'll ignore you. I'll go find Sister Zi Yuan and ask her to teach me how to cook. After saying that, the sound of footsteps could be heard, and the little girl ran away like a wisp of smoke. Li Yundong shook his head and laughed. He said to Zhou Qin, You are only one step away from the Zhuji phase. In the next 2 days, you should build a solid foundation, and then you can prepare to go to the Zhuji phase. Zhou Qin had also read a lot of cultivation books these days. She had more or less understood the Zhuji phase. She also knew that Li Yundong had walked to the Himalayas to build the Zhuji phase. He had polished his Nidenjinshi to be as strong and as hard as iron, which was why he had the invincible power after he had built the Zhuji phase. Zhou Qin asked with some nervousness and yearning, Will I also go to Tibet? Li Yundong nodded and said, Of course, I will help you prepare the things. You don't have to worry. Zhou Qin asked tentatively, When should I leave? Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, In these 2 days. Zhou Qin hesitated for a moment and said, Can you wait until the shop opens? I'm a little worried. Li Yundong smiled and said, With us here, what's there to worry about? Zhou Qin just shook her head and looked at Li Yundong with a pleading face, not saying anything. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He thought to himself, could it be that Zhou Qin doesn't want to miss such an important thing? Thinking of this, he nodded his head and said, All right then, I'll teach you some basic cultivation techniques and some magical spells in the next few days. Once you reach the foundation building realm, you can start cultivating on your own. Zhou Qin was overjoyed, and an incomparably bright smile suddenly appeared on her face. That's great. When can I start teaching? Li Yundong thought for a moment and said, Let's start tonight. Come to my room at 12 o'clock tonight. See. Chapter 396. Go to watch net. After having a lively dinner, Li Yundong and the others returned to their rooms to cultivate. Watch net. 7 k.o.m. When it was almost midnight, Zhou Qin, who shared a room with Su Chan, quietly opened her eyes. She looked at Su Chan, who was sleeping opposite her. The usually lively little girl was sleeping like a baby. She was wearing pink lace pajamas, and her body was curled up into a ball. She held a pillow tightly in her arms, as if she was always on guard against someone snatching it from her. She was snoring softly through her nose, which made her look very cute. Although Zhou Qin was jealous that Su Chan could win Li Yundong's favor, she really couldn't harden her heart to have the slightest hostility towards this innocent and lovely girl. She gently got out of bed, pulled the quilt for Su Chan, and then quietly went out of the door. In order not to disturb Su Chan, Zhou Qin deliberately did not close the door, but just left it open. But after Zhou Qin went out, Su Chan secretly opened her eyes a little. She also quietly got up and ran to the crack of the door to take a peek. The girl watched as Zhou Qin gently knocked on Li Yundong's door. Li Yundong's magnetic voice came from inside. "Come in." Zhou Qin pushed the door open and walked in. Su Chan suddenly pouted. Although she knew that Zhou Qin had gone to Li Yundong's room so late, it was very likely that Li Yundong wanted to teach her cultivation. She was still a little jealous. She wanted to go to the door and eavesdrop on what the two of them would say, but considering that she had been discovered by Li Yundong last time, she rejected the idea as soon as it came to her mind. Su Chan gently closed the door, leaned her back against the door, and stared at the ceiling. She sighed with a sad face. "Little girl, if you don't behave yourself, I'll really despise you." Su Chan sighed. "Oh, little girl." The little girl sat down on the floor, holding her chin with one hand and resting her elbow on her knee. She bent her fingers with the other hand and muttered to herself, "Look, Sister Zhou Qin has taken the Renyuan Jindan again. She will become very powerful in the future. She also knows how to do business, and her calligraphy is not bad. She can help Li Yundong a lot. Sister Zi Yuan is the best. She seems to be able to do everything." Li Yundong thought. "Sigh, why don't I know anything? The only thing I'm good at is calligraphy, but I can't compare to Sister Zi Yuan." The little girl sighed in self-pity and pouted, "Little girl, why do you only know how to make trouble? In the past, you could help Li Yundong with his cultivation, but now, you can't help him at all." Su Chan thought for a while and suddenly felt refreshed. "No, I'd better go to Chao Yi Shibua and ask her to teach me how to cook. You can't do anything else, but at least you have to know one thing." Thinking of this, the little girl jumped up, gently opened the door, and walked out quietly. When the little girl walked to the door of Chao Yi's room, she was about to knock when she suddenly thought of what had happened to them on Mount Gazelle. Chao Yi Shibua was probably Yan Hua, who had led them to Mount Gazelle. Thinking of this, the little girl suddenly shivered and turned to leave. But as soon as she lifted her foot, she heard a vague voice coming from the room. It sounded like two women were arguing, and the voice was vaguely familiar. Su Chan leaned her ear against the door and listened. She vaguely heard Chao Yi Shibua arguing with another person in a low voice. "What are you doing here? Can't I come?" "Humph, I'm warning you, don't be too arrogant, otherwise, humph." "Otherwise what?" "Hey, go and expose me. At worst." When Su Chan heard this, she suddenly felt a chill run down her spine. It was as if someone was staring at her coldly through the door. The little girl quickly straightened up. As soon as she did so, she saw the door open. Chao Yi looked at Su Chan in surprise and asked in a deep voice, "Chaner, it's so late. What's the matter?" The little girl's gaze quickly followed Chao Yi's back and looked inside. She saw that the window was wide open, and the cool wind was blowing the screen. There was no one inside. Her gaze fell on Chao Yi again. Just as she was about to speak, she suddenly keenly sensed the deep murderous intent in Chao Yi's eyes. Su Chan shivered fiercely. She opened her mouth, but didn't know what to say. At this moment, a loud buzzing sound suddenly came from Li Yundong's room. The little girl had an idea and immediately said, "There's movement in Yundong's room. I want to ask Chao Yi Shibua to go and see what's going on." Although there was still suspicion in Chao Yi's eyes, her murderous intent finally subsided little by little. She smiled and said, maybe the leader is refining the magical item. The little girl pretended to be suddenly enlightened. She patted her forehead and said, yes, Chao Yi Shibwa, you are so smart. I'm going back to sleep. With that, the little girl slipped back to her room without looking back. As soon as she closed the door, she leaned against the door with her heart pounding. She stared at it and muttered to herself, how did Chao Yi Shibwa know that Yundong has a new magical item? While the little girl was feeling uneasy in the room, Zhou Qin and Li Yundong were in the room, completely unaware of what was happening outside. When Zhou Qin pushed open the door, she saw Li Yundong sitting cross-legged in the room. Behind him was a floor-to-ceiling window with the curtains drawn. A full moon was hanging in the middle of the window, and the moonlight was like water sprinkling on Li Yundong's body, as if it was draping him with a layer of silver cassock. At this moment, Zhou Qin suddenly felt that Li Yundong's whole body was emitting an indescribable lingqi and qi of transcendence, as if Li Yundong would ascend to heaven in the next second. Zhou Qin stood at the door in a daze until Li Yundong smiled and said to her, why are you in a daze? Come in. Only then did Zhou Qin wake up as if from a dream and walk in. After entering the door, she didn't see Li Yundong move, but the door behind her gently closed. Zhou Qin looked at Li Yundong, who was sitting cross-legged in the room. She took a deep breath, sat down cross-legged, and said respectfully, Master, what are you going to teach me today? There was an antique sword on Li Yundong's knee. He gently stroked the blade of the sword with his hand and said, do you know this sword? Zhou Qin recognized at a glance that it was the one that Yan Hua had brought to the school last time. She nodded and said, yes, isn't this Yan Hua's family heirloom sword? Li Yundong smiled slightly and said, yes, but also no. But you must be wondering why this sword is in my hand. Zhou Qin smiled and nodded embarrassedly. Li Yundong smiled and said, I haven't been cultivating for a long time, but your cultivation time is even shorter than mine. Therefore, compared to you, I'm considered a person who has seen a lot of things. Do you still remember what I told you about Mount Gazao a few days ago? Zhou Qin nodded, and Li Yundong said, on Mount Gazao, I snatched the Renyuan Jindan and gave it to you. But there is one thing I didn't tell you. At the same time, I also snatched Yan Fang's magical item, the Liuha. As he said this, Li Yundong drew out the Liuha with a clang and gently stroked it with his fingers. Immediately, the long sword made a soft buzzing sound, and the long sword emitted a faint light. Li Yundong said softly, the jinqi of the original owner of this sword has been completely expelled by me. After that, it was struck by heavenly thunder. I originally thought that it would be broken, but I didn't expect that not only would it not be broken, but it would also absorb a lot of heavenly thunder and become stronger. Li Yundong sighed softly and said, this is the Bahuang Liuha, the mother sword of the mother-child sword, which is specially for women. However, you don't have the Zhuji phase now, nor do you have a Naiden, so you only have Yuanyin and Yuanyang Qi in your body, but no Jinqi. You can't make this sword recognize you as its master, so today I can only teach you how to make a magical item recognize you as its master. This is also what Zi Yuan taught me back then. As he said this, Li Yundong's Jinqi suddenly gathered into a ball. In the blink of an eye, it rushed to the tip of his finger, and then quickly rushed to the body of the Liuha. Zhou Qin stared at Li Yundong with her eyes wide open. At first, she saw that Li Yundong's qi was surging, his hair was floating, and the corners of his clothes were moving without any wind. Sitting opposite Li Yundong, she could feel a strong wind blowing on her face, as if it was going to push her away. In Zhou Qin's opinion, the Liuha did not move at all at first. Li Yundong's jinqi was like a clay ox entering the sea. But after a while, the sword suddenly shook slightly. Then, the shaking became more and more intense, and the Liuha let out a fierce sword cry. This kind of sound was like a dragon's cry and a phoenix's cry. It was clear, passionate, sonorous, and particularly loud in the middle of the night. After a while, the Lyoha shook so much that Zhou Qin felt as if there were several Lyoha swords in front of her. There were many afterimages on the body of the sword, as if the long sword would fly out of Li Yundong's hand in the next second. At this time, Li Yundong suddenly shouted, "Stop!" The Jinshi all over his body surged into the Lyoha sword like an avalanche. The Lyoha sword, which was shaking violently, suddenly stopped, and many afterimages merged into one in an instant. At this moment, Zhou Qin saw the Lyoha sword suddenly emit an extremely dazzling white light. She subconsciously covered it with her hand. At this moment, the room was as bright as day, and then the light immediately disappeared, and the whole room fell into darkness. After Zhou Qin put down her hand, she stared at the Lyoha sword with wide eyes. She saw that the sword, which was about 1 meter long, was flowing with a faint silver light, and its whole body was exuding a mysterious and quiet aura. Li Yundong smiled and looked at the Lyoha sword. The Lyoha sword did not fall down. It floated in the air like a newborn baby, looking around curiously and vigilantly. After a while, it suddenly turned and pointed at Li Yundong, looking like a tiger eyeing its prey. Zhou Qin only felt that the sword chi of the Lyoha sword was sharp and threatening. Although the sword was not facing her, she still felt a chill down her spine. Seeing that the tip of the Lyoha sword was pointing at Li Yundong, Zhou Qin couldn't help but cry out worriedly, "Master, you." Li Yundong raised his hand and stopped her with a smile. He shook his head gently at her and said softly, "It's okay. It can't hurt me." As if to confirm Li Yundong's words, the Lyoha sword suddenly jumped up and shuttled around the room happily after looking at him for a while. Zhou Qin only heard the whooshing sound of the long sword in the room. The speed of the Lyoha sword was so fast that she couldn't keep up with it with her naked eye. She could only see a few silver lights rolling back and forth around her. After a while, the Lyoha sword suddenly stopped. The silver light in the room disappeared, and the shining sword stopped behind Li Yundong with a buzzing sound, looking around arrogantly. Li Yundong smiled and said, "Magical items are psychic, and among all magical items, the most psychic is the sword. Don't underestimate this long sword. It has its own thoughts. Just now, it was trying to determine whether I am its master or not." Zhou Qin's face was full of shock. She was tongue-tied for a long time before she exclaimed, "It turns out that there really are sword immortals in this world. There really is such a thing as flying swords killing people." Li Yundong chuckled and said, "It's incredible, isn't it? Someday, I'll ask Zi Yuan to tell you about the story of the Lyoha sword, how these magical items are made, and where their principles come from." Zhou Qin smiled and said, "Master, I want you to teach me." Li Yundong said curiously, "Zi Yuan knows more than I do." Zhou Qin shook her head and said, "No matter how much she knows, she's not my master." Li Yundong gave Zhou Qin a meaningful look. He nodded and said, "Well, you can go back to your room to sleep in a while. Don't go to the store with us tomorrow. Cultivate well at home." Zhou Qin opened her mouth to say something, but Li Yundong raised his palm and said in a deep voice, "There's no room for negotiation." Zhou Qin didn't insist anymore. She was a strong and domineering woman, but no matter how strong and domineering a woman was, when she met the man she loved deeply, she would always show her soft side. She smiled helplessly and said, "Well, master, don't be too tired." Li Yundong had indeed consumed a lot of jinshi to make the Lyoha sword recognize him as its master. At this time, his face looked a little pale. He smiled slightly and said, "I'm fine. You can go to sleep." Zhou Qin left Li Yundong's room. After returning to her own room, she stole a glance at Su Chan. She saw that the little girl had turned over and was facing the wall, her body still curled up into a ball. Zhou Qin smiled slightly and got into bed, but her eyes were wide open. Li Yundong's handsome figure in the moonlight seemed to be swaying in front of her eyes, making her not feel sleepy at all. Su Chan, on the other hand, stared at the snow-white wall with her eyes wide open. Her beautiful eyes flashed with doubt, vigilance, and a trace of wisdom and cunning. The two beautiful girls lay on their respective beds, each thinking about their own things. They tossed and turned, unable to sleep all night. C. Chapter 397. Go to watch net. The next morning, when Li Yundong walked out of his room, he found that the living room was already full of people. The little foxes were ready to set off early. Zi Yuan was quietly reading a book in a corner of the sofa. Chao Yi, Zhuang Yiting, and Lu Yuehong were gathered together, whispering to each other. Su Chan, who usually liked to laugh with the little foxes, was sitting alone in the dining room, slowly drinking porridge while her eyes darted around. Go to watch net. When the little girl saw Li Yundong, her face immediately lit up with joy. She jumped up, wiped her mouth with her hand, and was about to throw herself into Li Yundong's arms with a smile. Li Yundong looked at her hands that had wiped her mouth and said with a smile, "Hey, don't wipe your hands on me." Before the little girl could hug Li Yundong, she was stopped by him. She looked resentful and said, "You're so annoying. I just want to hug you." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Yes, wipe your hands by the way." Su Chan stuck out her tongue and said, "You found out." Li Yundong tapped Su Chan's nose and scolded her with a smile, "Don't you think I don't know how many intestines you have in your stomach?" While the two of them were laughing, Lu Yuehong, who had been silent all this time, suddenly asked with a smile, "Leader, there was a lot of noise in your room last night. What were you busy with?" Li Yundong turned his head with a smile and said, "Nothing. I recently subdued a new magical item." Lu Yuehong smiled and said, "Really? This is going to be an eye-opener." The little foxes also chattered excitedly, "I told you last night that Leader was collecting magical items, but you didn't believe me." "Humph, who doesn't believe me? We were just guessing what kind of magical item Leader was collecting." Li Yundong ignored the little foxes who were whispering to each other. His eyes inadvertently met Zi Yuan's, and then he quickly looked away as if nothing had happened. He said with a smile, "Well, it's good for everyone to have a look." As he said that, he didn't move. Suddenly, a 3-foot-long sword jumped out from behind him. The body of the sword was engraved with sword patterns, and a red sword tassel hung from the hilt, giving it an antique feel. When Chao Yi saw the long sword, her expression did not change, but a sharp light flashed in her eyes. Zhuang Yiting, who was next to her, moved her face slightly, showing a very surprised look. Lu Yuehong was the most surprised. She cried out involuntarily, Is this the Lyoha? Lyoha? The little foxes exclaimed at the same time and gathered around the Lyoha to see what it was. The Lyoha sensed the demon aura of the little foxes and immediately flew up. The edge of the sword trembled slightly, pointing at the little foxes with vigilance and hostility. The little foxes were so scared that they screamed and immediately retreated in all directions. Li Yunyang chuckled and waved his hand. The Lyoha instantly flew back behind him and disappeared. Only then did the little foxes gather in the living room again, still in shock. They looked at Li Yunyang with awe and whispered, "Leader is so powerful. He has another great magical item. Yes, it would be great if we could get the Bahuang sword too. I don't know when Leader got the Lyoha." "Stupid, ask the sect leader." "Yes, let's ask the sect leader." Li Yunyang saw the little girls whispering to each other for a while, and then suddenly rushed over like a tide. He quickly took 2 steps back and pointed at Su Chan, "If you have something to ask her, she knows." The little foxes rushed over to Su Chan like a tide, surrounding her like stars surrounding the moon, waiting for her to tell the truth. The little girl raised her head proudly and said, "It's a long story." Seeing that Su Chan was keeping them in suspense, the little foxes hurriedly urged, "Shimmy Su-chan, ah no, Shiji Su-chan, can I call you Shiji? Tell me quickly." "That's right, Sister Su-chan, tell me quickly." Su-chan's seniority in the Fox Zen school was very low, and she had always been the one to call others sister. Today, a large group of people suddenly called her sister. The little girl laughed so hard that her nose and eyes disappeared. "You want to hear it? Then don't quarrel." Seeing that the little girl had begun to tell the story proudly, Li Yundong couldn't help laughing and shaking his head. He said to Chao Yi, Ziyuan, and the others, "I'm going to freshen up and then go out." When he finished freshening up, the little girl was talking about the embarrassing scene of them coming to Mount Gazao and being forced to show up by Yan Hua. However, they had inadvertently forced out other people from various sections. The little foxes were listening carefully, and when they heard this part, they suddenly burst out laughing. Li Yundong glanced around and saw that Lu Yuehong was covering her mouth and laughing. Although Chao Yi and Zhuang Yiting were also laughing, their smiles were a little unnatural. Li Yundong felt strange in his heart. It's normal for one of Chao Yi and Zhuang Yiting to behave strangely. Why are both acting a little strange? Li Yundong's gaze lingered on Chao Yi for a little longer. Chao Yi seemed to sense his gaze, so she turned her head and said with a smile, "Leader, what's the matter?" Li Yundong smiled and said, "It's nothing. Let's go." The group of people chatted and laughed as they went out. The little girl was very eloquent, and she vividly told them what had happened on Mount Gazao that night. The little foxes sometimes exclaimed and sometimes held their breath, not daring to breathe too loudly. It wasn't until they arrived at the pedestrian street that Su-chan finally told them what had happened. After hearing this, the little foxes sighed and began to chatter. One of them asked Su-chan in confusion, "Su-chan, how did you meet leader and Jinren Ziyuan that night?" Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He turned his head and looked behind him. Coincidentally, Ziyuan was also looking at him. Their eyes met and then fell on Su-chan at the same time. Su-chan rolled her eyes and said with a smile, "I was bored in my room at night, so I went out for a walk to get some fresh air. Then I ran into them." When Li Yundong heard this, he laughed in his heart and thought, "Hey, this little girl has actually learned to lie, and her face doesn't change at all." Li Yundong's eyes quickly swept over Chao Yi and the others, but he didn't see anything unusual about them. He frowned secretly and was about to speak when he suddenly saw the little girl pointing ahead in surprise and saying, "What's going on there?" Li Yundong and the others looked forward and saw that in front of the pedestrian street, there were 3 layers of people inside and outside. A group of people was pointing at the scene, and that place was where Li Yundong's Desengxian was. Li Yundong's heart tightened and he thought to himself, could something have happened in the store? Where's Ruan Hongling? Could something have happened to her? Li Yundong immediately stepped forward and pushed through the crowd. As soon as he squeezed through the crowd, he didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He saw 7 young men kneeling in the field, each of them holding a wooden sign in their hands. Judging from the situation of the onlookers outside the field pointing at the wooden sign, it seemed that there were words written on it, but these people had their backs to Li Yundong, so he couldn't see the specific words clearly. Ruan Hongling was in front of them, sitting on a pile of red bricks, pointing at them and saying, "Hey, the order in which you lined up is wrong. Change it again. Why is it still wrong after changing it so many times? Your powers of comprehension are too poor. I've seen you line up in an S shape all night, and then a B shape. Tell me, how can I let you go when you line up like this?" The leader of the gangsters said with a sad face, "Beauty." As soon as he opened his mouth, Ruan Hongling glared at him, threw a small stone at him, and shouted, "What did you call me?" "Grandma, Grand Aunt." The gangster was hit so hard that his body bent over, and the sign in his hand fell to the ground with a bang, revealing a painted Li character. The gangsters next to him immediately craned their necks to take a look, then quickly winked at each other, stood up in unison, adjusted their positions, and knelt down again. Suddenly, the surrounding people burst into laughter and whispered to each other. "Who is this Li Yundong? I don't know, and I don't know how this guy offended this wild beauty. Alas, I've watched too many Korean movies, and there are more and more wild girlfriends. It's terrible. TSK TSK. Li Yundong's face was full of strange. He quietly moved in front of these gangsters in the crowd. He only took a glance, and suddenly became angry. He saw that the gangsters were holding a sign in order, "Li Yundong, you bastard." The last person was holding up a bright red exclamation mark. Li Yundong was so angry that he rushed to Wan Hongling angrily, lowered his voice, and shouted, "Hey, what's wrong with you? What's going on here?" Wan Hongling had already seen Li Yundong at a glance, but she deliberately pretended not to see him. When Li Yundong couldn't help but rush in front of her, she pretended to recognize him and said with a matter-of-fact expression, "Didn't you see? I caught a few little thieves who came to make trouble at night, and then I painstakingly persuaded and educated them. I told them why I was here so late, and also told them who let me be here." Wan Hongling stood up, pretending to be innocent, and said to Li Yundong, "Then I asked them, do you think this Li Yundong is a bastard?" They nodded their heads desperately to show their agreement. Alas, the great man said, "The eyes of the people are as clear as snow. What do you think?" Li Yundong was so angry that he laughed. He pointed to the sign in the hands of these guys and said, "Well, you win. Then why did you make them do this?" Wan Hongling rolled her eyes at Li Yundong. "What? What else can I do? Play. Otherwise, what else do you want me to do in the long night?" Li Yundong was tongue-tied. "Are you playing?" Wan Hongling suddenly showed a mischievous expression. She pointed to the sign held high above the heads of these gangsters and said, "Of course, I gave each of them a sign, but I didn't tell them what was written on it. Then I let them rank it themselves. If it's not right, they can rearrange it. When it's right, I'll let them go." Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. "I give up. Well, now it's finally right. Let them go quickly. Don't you see how many people there are here? Do you want the police to come?" Wan Hongling snorted and said to the gangsters, "Hey, you're right. Look up and have a look." These gangsters had obviously been fooled by Wan Hongling all night. None of them dared to look up. They just shook their heads vigorously. Wan Hongling laughed and scolded, "A group of idiot cowards. I'm not lying to you this time. Look up." The leader of the gangsters saw that Wan Hongling didn't look like she had lied to them several times before, so he boldly raised his head. Seeing that someone had taken the lead, the gangsters also turned their heads to look at their own signs. It would have been better if they hadn't looked at it, but when they saw it, they immediately said angrily, "Damn it, who the hell is this Li Yundong? How could he make me so miserable all night? When I see him, I'll beat him to death sooner or later." Wan Hongling laughed so hard that she covered her stomach and almost rolled on the ground. Su Chan and the others also laughed hard. Even Zi Yuan couldn't help but cover her mouth and giggle. Li Yundong walked up to these gangsters, kicked the talking gangster in the butt, and said with a black face, "I am Li Yundong. What do you want?" The gangsters were shocked. They hadn't expected that the man they had been cursing the whole night was standing right in front of them. They were all stunned for a moment and stared at Li Yundong, speechless. Wan Hongling, who wanted to see the world in chaos, tried hard to hold back her laughter and said, "Hey, the person has appeared. Revenge." These gangsters were not stupid. They had seen the way Li Yundong and Wan Hongling talked before. Obviously, they were friends, and they were very close. Wan Hongling had taught them a lesson all night, so how could they dare to act rashly? The leader of the gangsters said shamelessly, "Brother Li, no, Master Li. May I ask where you are from? The leader of the gangsters said this just to be polite, so that he could explain to his brothers in the future. However, one Hongling said, "You don't even know him? Are your eyes blind? Take a good look at his name." The leader of the gangsters stared at the sign in his hand with the big Li written on it, and then asked tentatively, "Master Li, is your father Li Gang?" As soon as this sentence was said, the crowd around them suddenly burst into an uproar. They all pointed at Li Yundong and whispered to each other, including Eric. Li Yundong glared at Wan Hongling angrily and said, "Let's see how you deal with this." Wan Hongling snorted and said with a look of indifference, "Watch me." Then, she put her hands on her hips and shouted to the crowd around her, "Did you hear that? His father is Li Gang. If you're not afraid, stay. If you're afraid, leave. Otherwise, you'll die." The crowd immediately scattered in all directions like birds and beasts. Even a few gangsters scrambled to escape with the crowd. In an instant, only Li Yundong and the others were left, like a few bare stones on the beach after the tide had receded. Wan Hongling spread her hands and said proudly, "See, it's very useful." Li Yundong glared at her and said, "You played a little too much this time." Wan Hongling glared back at him without showing any weakness. "Who told you to leave a weak woman like me here to look after the shop? It's like a ghost shop. Do you want to scare me to death?" Li Yundong laughed angrily and said, "You can be scared by ghosts. If a ghost sees you, it's good enough that it won't be scared to death. Are you kidding me?" Seeing that the two of them were about to quarrel again, Zi Yuan was about to step forward to mediate when she suddenly heard a noise and a burst of footsteps not far away. Li Yundong and the others turned their heads in the direction of the sound and suddenly saw a group of people rushing over like a tsunami. A woman among them shouted, "Where is he? Where is Li Gang's son?" Another earth-shattering voice came from the crowd. "Over there, over there." Li Yundong was stunned and felt a headache coming on. He stammered, "F***ck, isn't this too exaggerated? How can we end this? Last week, I ranked 7th on the top flowers list. This week, I updated 4 times, 2,467 respectively. In addition, let me rest for 7 days during the new year. I don't need to vote for flowers this week. I'll vote for the children who need it. Next week is the new year. I'll rest for a week, but there will still be 2 updates every week. I hope my readers can understand. Thank you very much. See. Chapter 398. Go to watch net. For a moment, Li Yundong hesitated as he watched the crowd of people swarming toward him. He wondered if he should hide for a while. But when he thought about turning around and running away, he didn't feel good about it. He was the leader of a sect in the cultivation world. How could he be chased away by a group of ordinary mortals? If word got out, how could he show his face? But if he didn't run away, would he have to beat all of them down? Wouldn't that be a mess? While Li Yundong was hesitating, he suddenly heard a familiar and loud voice coming from the crowd. Where is the person you were talking about?" Li Yundong thought that the voice was very similar to Feng Na's. He was stunned and looked in the direction of the voice. Sure enough, he saw a round-faced beauty in the crowd, holding a microphone in her hand. Her face was filled with righteous indignation as she rushed to the front. Behind her was a middle-aged man carrying a camera. Go to watch net. 7 KOM. Feng Na. Li Yundong's eyes widened. "What are you doing here?" he asked curiously. Feng Na was also stunned when she saw Li Yundong. "Li Yundong, what are you doing here?" she asked with surprise and joy. As soon as Feng Na finished speaking, she reacted quickly and said, "The son of Li Gang that these people were talking about just now, isn't that you? Li Yundong smiled bitterly. The flood rushed against the temple of the Dragon King. He said, pointing to Wan Hongling beside him. This guy is causing trouble. Don't join in the fun. Wan Hongling rolled her eyes at Li Yundong. Who told you to guard the store? Guard the store. Feng Na blinked. Guard the store. Li Yundong also glanced at the cameraman behind Feng Na and asked curiously, this thing can't be explained in a short time. What's going on with you? Feng Na smiled at the cameraman behind her and said, you're mistaken. This is my classmate, not the son of an official. After saying that, she turned to the crowd behind her and said loudly, you guys are mistaken. This is my college classmate. He's still a junior at Tiannan University. He's not the son of an official. You guys are mistaken. The crowd burst into an uproar and complained for a while before slowly dispersing in all directions. Feng Na walked to the middle-aged cameraman and said, Uncle Xian, can I have a word with my classmate? Why don't you go back first? The middle-aged man glanced at Li Yundong, then glanced at Su Chan, Zi Yuan, and the other beauties behind him with a strange look. Obviously, he regarded Li Yundong as a playboy. He whispered to Feng Na, Nana, your father entrusted you to me. You can't mess around. Boys nowadays are very fickle. Be careful. Feng Na couldn't help but smile bitterly. Uncle Xian, you're thinking too much. I want to pursue him, but he doesn't care about me. The middle-aged man was relieved. That's good, that's good. Feng Na stomped her feet and said angrily, Uncle Xian, what are you talking about? Aren't you cursing me? The middle-aged man laughed and patted Feng Na on the head. He gave Li Yundong a deep look and turned to leave. After the middle-aged man left, Feng Na turned around. She was about to speak when she saw Li Yundong cough awkwardly. Su Chan, Zi Yuan, Wan Hongling, and the others also looked at her meaningfully without saying a word. Feng Na's heart suddenly skipped a beat. She thought to herself, oh no, it seems that they all heard what I said just now. It's over, it's over. I've lost face today. Feng Na's pretty face suddenly turned so red that it seemed as if blood was about to drip out. She was a little at a loss and didn't know what to say. Seeing this, Li Yundong hurriedly said, Feng Na, are you a reporter now? As soon as Li Yundong spoke, the awkward atmosphere suddenly dissipated a lot. Feng Na brushed her hair behind her ear. She calmed down and said, yes, I don't have much homework in my senior year, and there's nothing to do in the student union now. So I asked my father to let me intern at Tiannan TV station. Didn't you say last time that I was suitable to be a reporter? As she said this, Feng Na smiled playfully at Li Yundong. You weren't fooling me last time, were you? Li Yundong laughed. No, look at how sensitive your nose is. I heard a little noise here, and you came immediately. You're too competent as a reporter. Feng Na laughed and said, well, are you beating around the bush and saying that I have a dog's nose? Li Yundong winked at Su Chan and the others, indicating that they should enter the store first. Then, he turned to Feng Na and waved his hand, saying with a smile, I wouldn't dare, big reporter. You didn't happen to be around here for an interview, did you? Feng Na clasped her hands behind her back and looked at Li Yundong with a smile. Although she was a year older than Li Yundong, she always felt like she had to look up to him, be it in terms of his stature or any other aspect. This boy was too mysterious, too elusive. Even if she tried hard to track him down, she couldn't find a single trace of him. Feng Na looked at Li Yundong for a while, then said with a smile, not at all. How could there be such a coincidence? Someone called the TV station and said that something had happened, so my master brought me here. Anyway, the TV station is not far from here, so it didn't take long to get here. But I didn't expect to see you here. Who called? When did it happen? Li Yundong asked curiously. Feng Na thought for a moment. About 10 minutes ago. Li Yundong frowned. 10 minutes ago. Wasn't that when he first arrived? Who called? While he was wondering, he suddenly glanced around and saw Zhao Yuzhen standing in the opposite shop, staring at him like a wolf staring at its prey. When Zhao Yuzhen saw Li Yundong looking at him, he immediately turned around and walked into the shop. Li Yundong sneered in his heart. It's probably this guy who's playing tricks again. Feng Na didn't notice Li Yundong's sneer. She curiously looked at the shop next to Li Yundong. Through the gap of the plastic sheet, she could see Su Chan and Zi Yuan busy inside. She asked curiously, by the way, you said you were guarding the shop just now. Did you mean this shop? Li Yundong, don't tell me that you opened this shop. Li Yundong withdrew his gaze from Zhao Yuzhen and said with a smile, I opened it with a friend. Feng Na was surprised and delighted. She punched Li Yundong in the shoulder and said, well done. I was wondering why I hadn't seen you for the past few days. Last time, you went to school to explain the relationship between scholars and chrysanthemums, and then you disappeared again. It turns out that you went to open a shop with a bunch of beauties. Feng Na was so excited that her voice was a little loud, causing the passers-by to look at Li Yundong strangely, as if they were looking at a chicken head in a red light district. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, Mr. President, can you keep your voice down? Can you not be so surprised? Only then did Feng Na realize that her words were a little inappropriate. She covered her mouth and laughed, then said, no, it's your fault for not telling me such important news. You didn't even answer my phone. You went too far. Li Yundong patted his forehead and said, alas, if you hadn't mentioned it, I would have forgotten that I had a mobile phone. I haven't used it for days. Feng Na was completely speechless. She cupped her hands to Li Yundong and said, I admire you. You're really good. Li Yundong chuckled and said, you should promote a green life and low-carbon travel. Feng Na rolled her eyes at Li Yundong and said, if you have the ability, don't take a car when you go out. That's low carbon. Li Yundong thought to himself, nonsense. I fly everywhere I go. If I can't, I'll take a car. If I'm not low carbon, then who is? But he couldn't say this to Feng Na, so Li Yundong smiled and changed the topic. By the way, when my shop is open, would you like to come and visit? Feng Na snorted and said, do I need you to say that? Speaking of which, you're really not a good friend. You didn't even tell me this kind of thing. Last time, I told you that if you opened a company, you would hire me to help you. You agreed readily, but what happened in the end? Li Yundong knew that he was in the wrong, so he didn't refute her. He laughed dryly and said, I was afraid that the shop would lose money, so I didn't dare to tell you. What if I called you over and the shop lost money? Wouldn't that be harming you? Feng Na curled her lips and said disapprovingly, what era are you in? You still think like that? I have hands and feet. Even if your shop really fails, will I starve to death in the future? I really can't stand your chauvinistic thinking. By the way, what kind of shop is this? This is a pedestrian street, and the flow of people is quite large. It shouldn't be a loss. Li Yundong smiled and said, my shop is a tea shop. Tea shop. Feng Na's eyes widened. She asked curiously, why do you want to open a tea shop? Li Yundong spread his hands and said with a wry smile, it's a long story. In short, you just need to know that my shop is a tea shop. Come and visit me when you have time. Feng Na looked at the shop that was being renovated in amazement, then looked around at the situation. She nodded and said, well, the location is quite good. I just don't know how your tea shop will look after the renovation and what its positioning will be. Li Yundong smiled and said, the initial positioning will be middle and high-end, mainly for those shops opened by rich people. Feng Na laughed and scolded, Li Yundong, you haven't become a rich man yet, but you've already abandoned us poor people. What if we want to come and drink tea in the future? Li Yundong laughed and said, what are you talking about? Of course I'll give you a discount if you come to drink tea. Then, Li Yundong winked at Feng Na and said, we're friends. Feng Na nodded with satisfaction. Well, I'm much more relieved to hear that. But the organization will pay more attention to you in the future. Anyway, I already know about your shop. In the future, the monk can run away, but the temple can't run away. Cheng Cheng has been talking to me about you for the past few days. Humph, one day I'll bring her to beat up a rich landlord like you. Li Yundong chuckled and said, well, I welcome you. By the way, when our shop opens later, you can come to attend, so I don't have to send you an invitation. Feng Na smiled playfully and said, no, it's too insincere. You must write the invitation in person, or we won't come. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and said, don't play with me. How can I show you my calligraphy? Feng Na patted Li Yundong on the shoulder and said angrily, you're not a good friend. It's a deal. You write the invitation, and I'll take your invitation to spread it around the school. Otherwise, people won't believe me without proof. Li Yundong's heart skipped a beat. He said happily, yes, you can spread it around the school. This is also a customer group that can be mobilized. Feng Na laughed and said, what do you think, Li Yundong? You haven't even opened your shop yet, but I've already expanded your customer group. You admire me, don't you? Li Yundong cupped his hands and said, I admire you. Mr. President, you really are a weirdo in the business world. If you want to join the business world, Bill Gates will have to sell sweet potatoes. After that, the two of them laughed at the same time. Feng Na covered her mouth and laughed. You're so annoying. I'm not that good. It's because you're popular in the school. Otherwise, no one would come even if I talked my mouth off. Be prepared on the opening day. I'm going to mobilize all the students in the school. Li Yundong was shocked and quickly said, hey, are you kidding? There are thousands of people in the school. If you get all of them, this street will be blocked. How can I open my shop? Just get 50, no, 20 handsome men and beautiful women to fill the scene. Don't let the shop be deserted when it opens. It won't look good. Li Yundong had no doubt that with Feng Na's ability to bewitch people, she would definitely be able to get all the students in the school to come here. And he had already seen it a few times before. If they all came, he was afraid that his shop would have to close down on the very first day. How could he afford to entertain them? Feng Na giggled, convulsing with laughter. She seemed to have found something that could be used against her. She smiled proudly and said, that's a deal. If you don't send out an invitation, I'll bring the whole school here for you. I'll make sure you die. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and was speechless. Feng Na looked at the time. She waved at Li Yundong and said with a smile, forget it. I'm leaving. I'll see you next time. As she said this, she made a phone gesture and said, hey, find a phone when you go back. Let's keep in touch. You can't ignore my calls. Otherwise, humph. Feng Na made a threatening expression at Li Yundong, then turned around and left with a smile. She thought to herself, Li Yundong, let's see how you can hide from me this time. Humph, I'll eat you up. Li Yundong smiled bitterly and shook his head. He pushed the door open and walked into the shop. Seeing him enter the door, Su Chan came up to him curiously. She asked, Yundong, what took you so long to talk to Feng Na? What was she laughing at? Li Yundong smiled and said, hey, she threatened me that she would get all the students in the school to come to support me on the opening day. Hearing this, Su Chan was immediately overjoyed. She clapped her hands and said, good, good. It must be very lively. Li Yundong glared at her. Nonsense. There are thousands of people. How can that be called support? That's called making a scene. Wan Hongling laughed and said, Li Yundong, you always have a high profile. Would it kill you to keep a low profile? Now, let's see what you can do on the opening day. Zi Yuan also pursed her lips and said with a smile, no, she should be joking with you. When the time comes, you can find some acquaintances to support you, so that it won't be good and auspicious if it's deserted. Li Yundong said to Su Chan and Wan Hongling, look, these are the words of an experienced strategist. Look at you, you just want to see the world in chaos. Get to work. Su Chan and Wan Hongling made faces at Li Yundong at the same time, then turned around and went upstairs. Li Yundong rolled up his sleeves and shouted to the little foxes who were looking at him eagerly, little ones, let's get to work. After that, the little foxes answered crisply and got busy. Just as Li Yundong was busy with the Fox Zen school, an uninvited guest suddenly came to Zhao Yogan's shop. See. Chapter 399. Go to watch net. Zhao Yuzhen didn't expect that when he called the TV station to make trouble for Li Yundong, he would become Li Yundong's enemy. This really made Zhao Yuzhen feel disgusted, as if he had swallowed a fly. Go to watch net. 7 K.O.M. But fortunately, Li Yundong didn't seem to find that the 7 people kneeling there before were secretly found by him. Thinking of this, Zhao Yuzhen couldn't help wiping away his cold sweat. When he saw these gangsters kneeling in front of the store early in the morning, he was so scared that he almost turned around and ran away. If it hadn't been for the large number of onlookers at that time, he would have run away. This bastard, why does he have to make things difficult for me every time? Zhao Yuzhen gritted his teeth and thought. He didn't feel that he was the cause of all these things at all, nor did he feel guilty at all. He only felt frustrated and unwilling. But after 2 lessons, Zhao Yuzhen completely gave up the idea of finding someone to make trouble for him. He began to think about how to make some trouble for Li Yundong's opening ceremony. It would be best if he couldn't open the business. Then he would wake up laughing at night. But what Zhao Yuzhen hoped most was that he could open his store earlier than Li Yundong, so that he could see the envy and jealousy in the other party's eyes. Especially when he saw the other party's cold opening ceremony, he could laugh at this young man who had always annoyed him. But now it seemed that his wish was slowly becoming an extravagant hope. Li Yundong and a group of beautiful women were decorating the store. This should have been a laughable thing, but Zhao Yuzhen couldn't laugh at all, because Li Yundong and his team's progress was 3 times that of these professional workers. In one day, they finished what these professionals had done in 3 days. This was simply the most incredible thing in the world. Zhao Yuzhen gritted his teeth with hatred, but there was nothing he could do in his heart. He didn't want to see the opening ceremony of the opposite store while his store was still under construction. I'm a star entrepreneur in a city, but I can't beat a young man. Zhao Yuzhen was so angry that he walked around the store like a trapped beast in a cage. Just as he was getting angry, a woman suddenly came in. She stood at the door and asked in a deep voice, "Is Zhao Yuzhen here?" Since Zhao Yuzhen had become famous, no one had ever called him by his name. Even the mayor had to politely call him Mr. Zhao when he saw him. Suddenly, a woman called his name, and he immediately said angrily, "Who is it?" He turned his head and saw a woman with a graceful figure standing at the entrance of the shop. Not only was she beautiful, but there was also a condescending arrogance between her brows, as if she was a superior creature looking down on a lower creature. Zhao Yuzhen had seen many beautiful women, but since the first time he had seen Su Chan and Zi Yuan, who could only be seen from afar but not played with, he no longer looked at those beauties with heavy makeup who exuded the aura of prostitution. He suddenly saw this woman and felt that her aura was very similar to that of Zi Yuan and the others. Her eyes were full of pity and indifference, as if they were gods and he, the so-called entrepreneur, was just a little bug. In the face of Zhao Yogan's question, the woman snorted coldly and did not speak. Zhao Yuzhen didn't like this feeling very much, but he knew that this kind of arrogant temperament could not be faked. It must have been cultivated over a long period of time. Only the real strong would have this kind of temperament, especially the woman in front of him. The arrogance between her brows made Zhao Yuzhen feel that he was standing in her territory, and every word she said to him was a kind and generous charity. Zhao Yuzhen suppressed the unhappiness in his heart and asked in a deep voice, "Who are you?" Only then did the woman take a proper look at Zhao Yuzhen. She didn't hide her disdain at all, as if she disdained to be associated with such a person. She coldly uttered 2 words, "Zhou Ping." It was as if saying a few more words would be a waste. Zhao Yuzhen frowned and said coldly, "What's the matter?" Zhou Ping glanced at Zhao Yogan's shop which was being renovated. She snorted and said, "Do you have a grudge against him?" Zhao Yuzhen immediately became vigilant. "What do you mean? He's just a college student who hasn't graduated yet. What grudge can I have with him?" Zhou Ping sneered and said, "You're an entrepreneur, yet you came here to open a tea shop, and it happens to be the same as the one opposite us. Do you think I'm a fool?" Zhao Yogan's heart was pounding. He thought to himself, could it be that she's standing up for that bastard? Zhao Yuzhen braced himself and said, "What do you want to do?" "Hey, let me tell you, don't mess around in broad daylight." Zhou Ping looked at Zhao Yogan's fierce appearance and sneered disdainfully. "Don't be afraid. I just came to ask you, do you have a problem with him? Because I also have a grudge against him, so I want to see if I can cause him some trouble here." Only then did Zhao Yuzhen feel relieved. He was secretly happy, but the woman's indifference and contempt seriously damaged his self-esteem. He frowned and said, "I don't need your help. You can go." Zhou Ping snorted and said with a sneer, "With the speed of your renovation, I'm afraid it won't be finished by next year." This sentence poked at Zhao Yogan's weak spot. He snorted and stiffened his neck without saying anything. Zhou Ping chuckled and said, "Why don't I decorate it for you? I'll definitely be faster than Li Yundong, and definitely not slower than him." Zhao Yuzhen was stunned for a moment. He looked at Zhou Ping in surprise and doubt. "You?" When the foreman and workers who were decorating the shop heard Zhou Ping's words, they immediately became furious. They surrounded her and scolded, "You be *tch, what are you talking about? Can't you see that we are in charge of this project? Where are you from? How dare you steal our work in front of us? How shameless you are! Be careful that I don't beat you up." Zhou Ping acted as if she hadn't heard them. She just stared at Zhao Yuzhen coldly and said, "You don't believe me?" Zhao Yuzhen shook his head and said, "No." Zhou Ping snorted coldly. She picked up an iron hammer from the ground with the tip of her foot, then pinched it with her 5 fingers and threw it into Zhao Yogan's hand. Zhao Yuzhen caught it in a flurry. When he took a look at it, he immediately gasped in shock. He saw that Zhou Ping had pinched 5 fingerprints on the big iron hammer, and the fingerprints were all clearly visible. The renovation workers next to them curiously came over to take a look, and their faces immediately turned pale with shock. Some of the workers who didn't believe it took the hammer and touched it with their hands. Only after confirming that it was indeed hard steel in their hands did they believe it. They looked at Zhou Ping in horror, as if they had seen a devil. Zhao Yuzhen stammered, "You, who the hell are you?" Zhou Ping snorted and said, "It's none of your business. You just need to answer me. Do you agree or not?" Although the foreman was afraid, in order not to be robbed of his business by Zhou Ping, he still braced himself and stood up. However, he didn't dare to speak to Zhou Ping again. He turned to Zhao Yuzhen and begged, "Mr. Zhao, we've already signed the contract. What do you think about this?" Zhao Yuzhen thought for a moment and said flatly, "I'll still pay you." He said to Zhou Ping, "How much do you want?" Zhou Ping laughed and said, "Money? Do I look like someone who is short of money? I just don't like this guy. Otherwise, do you think I want to talk to you?" Zhao Yuzhen was furious, but he suppressed his anger and said, "Then how can you guarantee that you can finish before them?" Zhou Ping snorted and said with a sneer, "I don't need to guarantee anything. If you believe me, then believe me. If you don't believe me, then forget it." After that, she walked out of the door. Zhao Yogan's face was gloomy. When Zhou Ping was about to go out, he suddenly shouted, "Okay, I believe you. When will it start?" Zhou Ping said without looking back, "In the afternoon. You'd better prepare for a lively opening ceremony, or I'll tear down your shop." With that, she swaggered off. Zhao Yuzhen looked at her leaving figure and gritted his teeth with hatred. He even suddenly felt that the guy surnamedly opposite him didn't seem to be so hateful. On the contrary, this woman was simply too arrogant. Just as Zhao Yuzhen and Zhou Ping were secretly colluding in the shop, Zhou Qin, who was cultivating at home, suddenly heard her phone ring. She let out a long breath and spat out a clear white gas from her mouth. However, her qi was not as condensed as Li Jiandong's. When she spat it out, it was like a sharp arrow that could spray more than 10 meters away without dispersing. Her qi, on the other hand, would immediately disperse 2 or 3 meters away. Zhou Qin stood up, picked up her phone, and suddenly frowned. A familiar name flashed on her phone, Zhou Kachang. It was her father. Zhou Qin hesitated for a while, considering whether to answer the call or not. But while she was thinking, the phone suddenly stopped ringing. After a while, another text message came. Zhou Qin opened it and saw that it said, "Qin Qin, I have something very important to tell you. Please come back quickly. Zhou Kachang." Zhou Qin frowned even more. She knew that her father never spoke empty words. If he said it was very important, then it must be very important. Moreover, she had been away from home for so many days and had not contacted her family. Her father had not asked about it. Obviously, he had shown great tolerance and understanding for her willfulness. Zhou Qin bit her lip gently. She held the phone and hesitated. After a while, she turned around and found a set of clothes to go out. Then, she rushed out of the door. Although the relationship between her and her father had always been very cold and even distorted, he was her father after all. Especially when it came to treating Li Jiandong, she was extremely willful. She even lost the political fate of the whole family, but her father did not blame her too much. Zhou Qin felt a little guilty about this. With a trace of worry and doubt, Zhou Qin quickly rushed home. As soon as she entered the door, she found 2 gray-haired elders sitting in the spacious living room. One was her father, and the other was Li Yuanhua, the secretary of the provincial party committee who had once helped resolve the conflict between the Zhou family and the He family. When the 2 elders, who were over 50 years old, saw Zhou Qin, they looked at each other and pinched the cigarettes in their hands at the same time. Zhou Kachang said with a serious expression, "Qin Qin, come here. I have a very important thing to ask you. You must answer it truthfully." Although Zhou Kachang had stepped down, there was no doubt that he was a high-ranking official. When he spoke, he naturally had the dignity and bearing of a superior. For a moment, Zhou Qin's heart was pounding. She thought in surprise, what on earth is it? Why is he so serious? Vote for recommendation previous page next page error report if you like. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your personal views. Chapter 400. Go to watch net. Zhou Qin looked at Li Yuanhua and her father, Zhou Keqiang, with uncertainty. She was like a nervous and vigilant deer. As long as there was the slightest sign of trouble, she would immediately escape. Watch net. 7 K.O.M. Zhou Qin looked at Zhou Keqiang and asked in a deep voice, "Dad, what's the matter?" Next to him, Li Yuanhua laughed. "Old Zhou, you scared Qin." Then, he waved to Zhou Qin and said, "Qin, come here. Ignore this old guy and sit next to me." Zhou Qin had grown up in the courtyard and had a good relationship with Li Yuanhua. He had always treated her as his own daughter. She calmed down a little, walked over, sat down gently next to him, and asked, "Uncle Li, what are you up to?" Li Yuanhua smiled and asked, "Qin, answer me honestly. What have you been busy with recently?" Zhou Qin was stunned and didn't know how to answer this question. She said awkwardly, "Uncle Li, can I not answer?" "Hey!" Li Yuanhua drawled and pretended to be angry. "No, of course not." Zhou Qin's heart skipped a beat. She asked tentatively, "Uncle Li, are you interrogating me on behalf of the organization?" Qin, how can you talk to your Uncle Li like that?" Zhou Keqiang said in a low voice, "If it weren't for Uncle Li, would you be able to live peacefully with your lover now?" Zhou Qin's cheeks suddenly turned red. She said angrily, "You know everything, but you still pretend to ask me. You're so annoying." Zhou Qin suddenly stood up, and Li Yuanhua, who was next to her, quickly tried to smooth things over. "Oh, sit down, sit down. Qin, why are you angry with your uncle? I watched you grow up. How come you don't even give me face now?" Only then did Zhou Qin sit down again. Although she was ashamed and annoyed, she quickly took a deep breath and secretly adjusted her qi. Slowly, the flush on her face subsided, and her whole person became as calm as water, calm and at ease. Li Yuanhua was secretly amazed. As he looked at Zhou Qin, he praised, "Qin, I haven't seen you for a while, but you've really changed a lot. This qi cultivation skill is not bad. Who did you learn it from?" "With your lover." As soon as Zhou Qin heard what they said, her calmness was broken again. Her cheeks turned slightly red and she said angrily, "Uncle Li, if you say that again, I'll leave." Li Yuanhua laughed and said to Zhou Keqiang, "Just now, I saw that Qin's qi regulating skill was very good. I thought that Qin had grown up, but it turns out that she's still the same. This is the Qin I know." Zhou Keqiang chuckled. He took out a pack of cigarettes from his pocket and handed it to Li Yuanhua. Li Yuanhua motioned for him not to smoke. Then, he took out one, lit it, and took a puff. "Her temper will never change. I used to wonder which man could subdue her. Now, there is a man who can, but he doesn't have a title." When Zhou Qin heard her father's words, she did not get angry for a moment. Instead, she just stared at the cigarette in his hand. Her eyes flashed, and she seemed to be thinking about something. Li Yuanhua chuckled and said, "Qin, when are you going to bring your lover to us two old men?" Zhou Qin still did not speak. She looked at the cigarette in Zhou Keqiang's hand in a daze. Zhou Keqiang said angrily, "Qin, Uncle Li is talking to you." Zhou Qin came to her senses. She looked at her father meaningfully and asked slowly, "You've been promoted again, haven't you?" This question immediately froze Zhou Keqiang and Li Yuanhua. The two elders, who were used to seeing the wind in the wind, looked at Zhou Qin in shock and were speechless for a moment. It was not until the ashes in Zhou Keqiang's hand fell to the ground that he asked in shock, "How did you know? Who told you?" Li Yuanhua also said curiously, "Qin, you are very well informed. I've only just found out about this." "How did you find out?" Zhou Qin sneered, and her smile was full of bleakness and emotion. She pointed to the cigarette in Zhou Keqiang's hand and said, "As far as I can remember, he has never asked others for permission when he smokes. The only time he asked was when he accompanied me to the hospital after he stepped down. At that time, when he resigned from his post at home, even if he wanted to smoke, he would hide to the side and smoke. Finally, he still cared about my feelings. But now, he has begun to smoke again. It can be seen that he has regained the feeling of being an official and doesn't care about the feelings of others." As she said this, Zhou Qin sneered at Zhou Keqiang and said, "What? You called me back today. Do you want to use your power to force me to do something?" Zhou Qin's words were like a sharp knife, piercing Zhou Keqiang and making him feel ashamed. Zhou Keqiang put out the cigarette in a hurry with an embarrassed look on his face, then said awkwardly, Qin, how can you say that about your father?" Li Yuanhua also sighed and said, Qin, this is also an old habit of many years. It's understandable that you can't get used to it for a while. Zhou Qin smiled faintly and said, Rome wasn't built in a day. Don't beat around the bush. Tell me, why did you ask me to come here today? Zhou Keqiang and Li Yuanhua looked at each other. Neither of them had expected that Zhou Qin would be able to tell that Zhou Keqiang had risen again from such a small matter, nor did they expect that she would show such indifference and hostility. The two of them smiled bitterly at the same time. Zhou Keqiang shook his head, his face full of helplessness. Li Yuanhua smiled and said, Qin, you don't have to be so nervous. After what happened to the He family, who would dare to force you? Aren't you afraid that someone will die? You, Miss Zhou, are as unyielding as fire and would rather break than bend. I'm afraid half of the Chinese officialdom has heard of this. Who wouldn't admire you? Everyone says that you are definitely an anomaly among the children of today's officials. Li Yuanhua said again, we asked you to come here today for a few things. The first is that the organization has reactivated your father. As for his official position, it can be considered as a promotion. However, he has been transferred to another province. The exact news of his appointment will only be released in about 10 days. We want to ask you now, do you want to take up the post with your father? Zhou Qin's expression was calm, as if the person who had recovered was not her father, but someone who had nothing to do with her. She said indifferently, why would I go? Zhou Keqiang said anxiously, what are you talking about? You are my daughter. If you don't go with me, who do you want to go with? Zhou Qin said coldly, that's none of your business. Zhou Keqiang was so angry that he said to Li Yuanhua, Old Li, look at this child. She is trying to piss me off. Li Yuanhua smiled and tried to smooth things over. Old Zhou, don't be impatient. Children nowadays are very rebellious. Don't be so rude. Zhou Keqiang snorted and sat in a chair, sulking. Li Yuanhua said to Zhou Qin with a smile, Qin, what you said just now is wrong. Your father is going to be an official elsewhere. How can you say what you are going to do? After all, you are father and daughter. No matter how much conflict there is, it is still a blood relationship. Zhou Qin sneered and said, he is the one going to be an official, not me. Am I wrong to say that? Li Yuanhua smiled and said, you are talking about the second thing I want to say. Let me ask you, have you ever thought about entering politics and becoming an official? Zhou Qin suddenly became highly vigilant, and her eyes were full of hostility. Why, did you find me another fiancé? Zhou Keqiang stood up angrily. Are you a hedgehog? Can you still talk nicely? Zhou Qin did not show any weakness and retorted, if you hadn't found me that man surnamed He, none of this would have happened. Seeing that the father and daughter were going to quarrel again, Li Yuanhua quickly interrupted, stop quarreling, you two. Old Zhou, sit down. Qin, don't talk back. Listen to me, your uncle. Zhou Keqiang sat down sullenly and subconsciously reached for his pocket. He wanted to smoke, but as soon as he took out a cigarette, he suddenly remembered what Zhou Qin had just said. He immediately threw the cigarette far away, making a loud bang. Zhou Qin also turned her head, her face stubborn and indifferent. She didn't even look at her father. She just stared at the door and said nothing. Li Yuanhua smiled bitterly and said, "Qin Qin, you think too much. We just think that with your talent and wisdom, it would be a pity if you don't enter politics. Look, just now, you were able to infer that old Li had recovered from such a small detail as smoking. It can be seen that your observation skills are extremely sharp, and your reaction and reasoning ability are also very strong. Moreover, you have such innate conditions. It would be a waste if you didn't enter politics." Zhou Qin was silent for a while before she said slowly, "Uncle Li, if it were in the past, I would definitely not refuse your kindness, but now?" Li Yuanhua quickly asked, "How is it now?" Zhou Qin clenched her fists subconsciously. She could feel a power that transcended mortals flowing and surging in her blood. She was no longer an ordinary Zhou Qin. She had already stepped into the threshold of cultivation, so how could she turn back? Zhou Qin shook her head and said, "I can't anymore, Uncle Li, don't ask me why. Anyway, I can't anymore. I don't want to enter politics. I just want to walk my own path." The path that Zhou Qin was talking about was the path of cultivation. Li Yuanhua and Zhou Keqiang looked at each other and thought that Zhou Qin was talking about the path of love. The two old men, who were over 50 years old, sighed at the same time. Zhou Keqiang laughed and said, "See, I told you it was useless. You had to call her back." Li Yuanhua smiled bitterly and said, "Young people always like to take some unique paths. Alas, if it were my children, I would definitely drive them back from this path. But you are different. You are too hot-tempered. I don't dare to drive you away. I don't want to see you lying in bed for the rest of your life. Forget it, you chose the path yourself. We won't force you. If you want to come back to this path again, remember to tell me immediately." Zhou Qin smiled slightly and stood up. "Uncle Li, thank you for your concern. As you said, I chose the path. No matter how lonely it is, I will continue to walk on my own. I will never regret it." With that, she nodded at Zhou Keqiang and said, "If there's nothing else, I'll be leaving first." Zhou Keqiang said, "Don't you want to leave after dinner?" Zhou Qin shook her head slightly. "No, I still have something to do." With that, she turned around and walked out of the door without looking back. She was elegant and clean, without the slightest hesitation or sloppiness. Zhou Keqiang sighed. "I told you, but you didn't believe me. How can she be a politician with such a personality? What does it mean to be a politician? It means compromise. Have you ever seen her compromise? I've never seen her compromise. Especially when she met that guy named Li Yundong. It's really infuriating. She comes and goes as she pleases." Li Yuanhua smiled and said, "You're wrong. How can anyone be born to be a politician? Qin Qin used to be very obedient. However, love can often change a person. Alas, this is her fate. There's nothing I can do about it." Zhou Keqiang snorted and stood up. He put his hands on his hips and said, "Humph, Li Yundong, don't fall into my hands in the future, or I'll teach him a lesson." Li Yuanhua nodded at him and said with a smile, "Look, you're acting like a bandit again. Before you were reinstated, you kept telling me how good this guy was. Now, you've turned the tables and turned the good into the bad. You can't do that. You have to criticize him." Zhou Keqiang laughed. Just as he was about to speak, he heard someone knocking on the door. Zhou Keqiang shouted, "Come in." "Sir." A secretary in a military uniform came in, holding a roll of documents in his hand. "Chief, I've brought you what you wanted." Zhou Keqiang nodded and pointed to the table. Put it here. After the soldier put down the file, he saluted and turned to leave. Li Yuanhua smiled and said, "Oh, what's the treasure? Let me see." Without waiting for Zhou Keqiang's consent, he opened it himself. After taking a closer look, he asked curiously, "Huh? Are you investigating Li Yundong?" Zhou Keqiang snorted. "Of course. How can I rest assured if I don't check who my daughter is following?" Li Yuanhua looked at it for a while and suddenly smiled. "Your future son-in-law seems to be in a bit of trouble now." Zhou Keqiang was surprised and asked, "What's going on?" "Let me see." He took it and looked at it. After a few glances, he sneered and said, "Humph, these be asterisk stars. Seeing that I've stepped down, they want to beat me while I'm down. How dare they embarrass the man my daughter likes?" Li Yuanhua laughed and said, "Old Zhou, you just said that you wanted to deal with this brat." Zhou Keqiang snorted and said unreasonably, "These be asterisk stars bullied the man my daughter likes. Isn't that bullying my daughter? Isn't bullying me the same as bullying my daughter? Humph, these be asterisk stars, do they think that I can't stand up again once I've fallen? Humph, I want to see which blind person dares to bully me." Vote for recommendation. Previous page. Return to contents. Next page. Error report. If you like it, please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your views. Chapter 401. Go to Watch Network. On the way back, Zhou Qin had been thinking about a question: should she tell Li Yundong the news of her father's resurrection? For Li Yundong and the others, this news was tantamount to a reassuring pill. It could make him more at ease to do other things, and he wouldn't have to worry about being shot in the dark all day long. As the saying went, it was easy to cultivate in the six-fan school. If there was a background in the officialdom, then no matter how weak a sect was, other sects would not dare to oppress it at will. Li Yundong's current situation was that he was not afraid of the other party making trouble for him in the cultivation world, but he was afraid that the other party would make trouble for him through various means in the secular world. Zhou Qin knew her father's temper very well. Although Zhou Keqiang was overbearing and rarely thought about others, he was an extremely protective person. Although she often quarreled with him, Zhou Keqiang still loved his daughter deeply. Zhou Qin firmly believed this. Even for herself, Zhou Keqiang would more or less protect Li Yundong. With this big backer, others would have to think twice if they wanted to make trouble for Li Yundong in business and politics. But after thinking about it, Zhou Qin decided not to tell Li Yundong about this, lest others think that she was asking for credit and showing off. Just as Zhou Qin was rushing back, Zi Yuan, who was in the shop, suddenly received a phone call. When she put down the phone, she winked at Li Yundong with a puzzled face. Then the two of them stood in the corner and whispered, "Li Yundong, I have good news." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Good news? Why are you so mysterious? Say it out loud." Zi Yuan shook her head and said, "No, there's something strange about this matter." Li Yundong asked curiously, "What is it?" Zi Yuan said in a low voice, "Didn't I tell you last time that someone was blocking our necks on the documents and registered capital?" Li Yundong's face darkened. "Is it possible that someone is playing tricks again?" Zi Yuan had a strange look on her face. "No, someone from the Industry and Commerce Bureau just called me and said that all the procedures have been passed, and all the documents have been handled." Li Yundong was tongue-tied. "What's going on?" Zi Yuan said, "I don't know. He suddenly called me just now to tell me that it has been done. The last time I called, he was hesitant." Li Yundong thought for a while and said, "Could it be that someone from another sect is helping us?" Zi Yuan smiled helplessly and said, "We only have enemies now. How can we have friends? Li Yundong asked, where is Du Fei? Could it be that he helped us? Zi Yuan thought for a moment, then shook her head and said, if that's the case, then we have to be even more vigilant. There's no such thing as a free lunch. Li Yundong nodded. Yes, I don't know what's going on. However, in general, we no longer have any worries. The thing that we were most worried about has been solved, and we can start working now. Zi Yuan smiled and said, that's right. Li Yundong shouted to the little foxes, little ones. The little foxes, who were busy, raised their heads one after another. Their faces were like little kittens, and they said in unison, yes. Li Yundong laughed and said, our various documents have been handled. There's nothing to worry about. Everyone can let go of their hands and feet and work. After he finished speaking, there was a burst of jubilation in the shop, and the little ones were all busy. Li Yundong looked at them with a smile. He glanced around and saw that Su Chan was looking out through the gap between the opaque plastic sheets on the glass window. Her little buttocks were raised high, and the tip of her buttocks was round and plump, looking very fleshy. Li Yundong quietly walked over and slapped the little girl's buttocks. The little girl jumped up with a cry and covered her buttocks with both hands, like a frightened rabbit. Li Yundong laughed proudly, as if he had done something amazing. Su Chan rubbed her buttocks with a reproachful look on her face. She said angrily, why did you hit me? Li Yundong smiled and said, why are you sticking your buttocks so high? The little girl suddenly forgot that her buttocks had been slapped. She pulled Li Yundong and said to him sneakily, Yundong, look, look. Li Yundong moved closer to the gap and saw that Zhao Yogan's shop had also been covered with opaque plastic sheets. There were people moving inside, but he couldn't tell what they were doing. Li Yundong straightened up and said, not knowing whether to laugh or cry, that's what you're looking at? Do you have to be so sneaky? You're like a thief. Su Chan blinked her eyes and said, it's all covered by the plastic sheets. If I don't move closer to the gap, I can't see clearly. Li Yundong pulled her to the door, pushed it open, and said, girl, can't you look at it like that? Su Chan's face suddenly turned red. She said shyly and angrily, you're so annoying. I didn't react for a moment. Li Yundong touched her head and said earnestly, girl, you can't come back to life if you're stupid. You should be reincarnated as soon as possible. You've been stupid enough in this life. You should be smarter in your next life. Su Chan threw herself on Li Yundong's back in exasperation, scratching and biting him. You dislike me, you really dislike me. Don't even think about it. Humph, I'm going to follow you. Even if you want to drive me away, I won't go. Li Yundong held the little girl's round buttocks with both hands and laughed. Okay, I won't go. As he said this, he carried the little girl back into the shop. In the opposite shop, Zhao Yuzhen stood by the window and lifted a corner of the plastic sheet. He looked at Li Yundong coldly and thought to himself, humph, be proud. I'll see how long you can be proud. He looked back, only to see Zhou Ping suddenly looking at him coldly and shouting, if you dare to say a word about what you saw today, I will twist off your head. Zhao Yuzhen shivered and quickly turned his head, venting all the anger he had received from Zhou Ping on Li Yundong. He gritted his teeth, and his eyes were as cold as a poisonous snake spitting out its poisonous tongue in a dark corner. Time flew by. Li Yundong and the Fox Zen School were busy buying all kinds of tea sets, tables, chairs, and decorating the shop, while Zhou Qin was doing basic cultivation exercises at home. In the blink of an eye, half a month had passed. The decoration of the Desanxian shop had been completely completed. Because the paint used was non-toxic and had no side effects, after Li Yundong, Zi Yuan, and the others finished the last decoration in the shop, they had a brief discussion and decided to set the opening ceremony for the next day. After confirming the opening time, Li Yundong and the others returned home and began to write invitations. But when they were about to write invitations, Li Yundong and the others became worried again. When others treat us, are we worried about who to invite? But if he were to treat, he would be worried. Who could he invite? Counting with his fingers, Li Yundong found that the number of people he could invite was less than the number of fingers on both hands. Feng Na is one of them. Ching Ching is also one of them. Okay, class monitor Sun Li is one of them. Li Yundong realized that he had almost no friends at school, and most of his friends were girls. He turned to Zi Yuan and said, "Isn't my university a bit of a failure?" Wan Hongling fanned the flames and said, "You are a failure." Zi Yuan glared at her and said, "Hongling, don't make trouble. Write your invitation." Wan Hongling snorted and said, "There are only a few people in total. What's there to write?" Su Chan comforted her and said, "Yundong, in fact, you are thinking too much. You have a lot of support in school. If you want to invite someone, I'm afraid you can invite thousands of people." Li Yundong smiled and said, "Forget it. It's better not to come here to watch the fun." As he said this, he simply pulled out 20 blank invitations and mixed them with Feng Na's invitation. Let her make the decision. Let her fill it out herself. Let's not waste our time. Zi Yuan saw that the group of people had been thinking for a long time. Most of the invitations written on the invitations were from students. She thought to herself, this is not a good thing. After all, it's a big shop. How can it be without a few supporters? Zi Yuan hesitated for a moment and said, "How about I find a few people?" Li Yundong refused without hesitation. "No, I know your people very well. They either covet your beauty or have something to ask of you. If you ask someone for help, it will be exactly what they want." Hearing this, Zi Yuan didn't know why, but she felt a little warm in her heart. She smiled and said, "Not all of them." Li Yundong shook his head and was about to speak, but he saw the girl next to him stretching her head out and wanting to say something. Li Yundong smiled and said, "Chaner, if you have something to say, just say it." Su Chan looked at Li Yundong and said weakly, "Yundong, do you want to send an invitation to President Chao?" "President Chao? Chao Kefi?" Li Yundong was stunned for a moment. Only then did he remember the beautiful and capable woman who was so beautiful that she could cause the downfall of a city and a country, but she was also worried and sick. Li Yundong asked curiously, "Why did you suddenly think of her?" Su Chan blinked and said, "Aren't you thinking about who you can invite? I think President Chao should be considered a friend, right? Even if she's not a friend, she's still an acquaintance, right?" Su Chan's words reminded Zhou Qin, who had been silent to the side. Zhou Qin had been immersed in cultivation these days, almost ignoring the outside world and wholeheartedly practicing the Tongtian skill. Hearing Su Chan's words, Zhou Qin remembered that she still had some friends in Tiannan City who could be called to support her. She opened her mouth and was about to speak, but at this time, Li Yundong said, "I won't disturb President Chao. I also caused a lot of trouble for her at the beginning. I'm sorry." Su Chan looked at Li Yundong with some confusion. "Why? I think she's very worried about you." Li Yundong didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He thought to himself, little girl, I didn't call her because of you. How could I not know what Chao Kefi is thinking? If he were to provoke her, who knew what would happen? You really don't have any schemes, do you?" Li Yundong was angry and amused at the same time. He pinched the little girl's nose and pretended to be angry. "Don't say anything. I have the final say in this matter." Su Chan pouted with some flagging interest. She made an "oh" sound and lay on the table unhappily. Hearing Li Yundong's words, Zhou Qin also closed her mouth and didn't mention this matter again, but she kept an eye on it in her heart. After finding an excuse to go to the bathroom, she took out her mobile phone, which she hadn't used for a long time, and found Yi Mengfan's phone number. Zhou Qin hesitated for a moment, then sent a text message. At this time, Yi Mengfan was signing documents in her office. The phone next to her vibrated. She picked it up casually and glanced at it. As soon as she saw it, she immediately dropped the pen in her hand and dialed a number. However, no one answered after a long time. Yi Mengfan sent a text message angrily and asked, "Zhou Qin, what's wrong with you? We haven't contacted each other for so long. Why didn't you answer my call?" After a while, Zhou Qin's text message came. She said, "It's not convenient. Text me." Yi Mengfan sighed. She felt that Zhou Qin might not have answered her call because she hadn't gone to see her when she was in trouble. She felt a little resentful. Yi Mengfan sent a text message and said, "Zhou Qin, are you still angry with me? There was a reason why I didn't go to see you at that time." After a while, Zhou Qin's text message came. "I know. At that time, the He family was arrogant. It was natural for you to protect yourself. You don't need to say it. I understand. I called you today for something else." Yi Mengfan was a little relieved. At this time, she didn't know that Zhou Kachang had recovered. She just asked guiltily, "What's the matter?" "As long as I can do it, I will definitely help." Zhou Qin's text message replied, "Tomorrow, on the pedestrian street, there will be a Desanxian tea shop opening. It's Li Yundong's shop. I want to invite you to come. Vote for recommendation previous page next page error report if you like it. Please click here to add Keeping a Fox at Home to your bookshelf, so that you can read the latest chapters and updates of Keeping a Fox at Home in the future. If you have any suggestions or comments on Keeping a Fox at Home, please click here to express your personal views. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.